Fierce Wind. Written by
嘟嘟雪球
Chapter 413. Retreat! Retreat! Run along the river. Run north along the Nujiang River. Don't fight any longer. The plane is left. Let's retreat first. Across from the Huli position, shouts were heard one after another from within the defeated Chen army. Everyone was running away in a hurry, and even the ferries and speedboats that had already reached the center of the river were turning around. Everyone was stunned by the sight of the plane falling from the sky. The falling fighter plane dragging flames completely crushed the Chen army's plan to cross the river quickly. When it finally crashed in a field less than 2 kilometers away from Huli, the Chen offensive came to a complete standstill. This is a very counterintuitive thing. Theoretically speaking, the Chens have at least 5 propeller fighters in their hands. Even if one is lost, they will still have an absolute advantage in subsequent air fire support. Even if these planes are still in Chen, even if they haven't refueled yet and haven't taxied out of the hangar yet, how long will it take to fly from there to Qingshui River? Half an hour should be enough, right? As long as they can hold out for half an hour, Huli still belongs to Chen, and Qingshui River must also belong to Chen. However, this is only a judgment that can be made from an omniscient perspective. In fact, no matter how powerful Syosad is, they cannot know how many individual air defense missiles the Dongfeng Corps has. In the eyes of the commander of the Chen army, the Dongfeng Corps had just arrived at the battlefield and joined the battle within 20 minutes, and they had already fired 2 anti-tank missiles and 4 anti-aircraft missiles. With this intensity and density of firepower, as a commander, do you dare to say that they don't have anything else in their hands? Moreover, they not only have portable missiles, but also fired more than 20 rockets on the positions they had just organized. Although these rockets rarely hit their targets, this way of fighting makes people wonder if they are fighting a wealthy war. A head-on charge was not an option. Losing 2 assault boats was fine, but if they continued to charge, even another plane and 2 M2S would be lost here. Not to mention how much more difficult the subsequent battles would be. At least in terms of the pressure on the superiors, it would be a huge problem. Therefore, the Chen commander chose the most conservative and safest plan. Retreat first, and then reformulate strategy and reorganize the attack after re-reconnaissance of the enemy's firepower and equipment. It must be said that this was exactly what Chen Chen wanted. This was exactly the effect he wanted. What he wanted was to demonstrate the deterrent power of the Dongfeng Corps in the first battle at one time, scare off the enemy, and thus buy precious breathing time for the Allied forces and the coalition forces. Looking at the Chen infantry fleeing to the north in the distance, and the M2 armored vehicles disappearing on the other side of the river, Chen Chen finally breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, if the other party is a little tougher and continues to hold on, I will have to consider running away. Fortunately, the pressure of modern guided weapons on the battlefield is still as strong as ever, and they are indeed frightened. But Chen Chen had no time to rejoice. After confirming that the enemy was really retreating, he immediately gave the order. Group 1 and Group 2, return immediately and lead everyone to evacuate towards the jungle and the reverse slope. Absolutely no pursuit is allowed. The enemy's artillery attack will arrive soon. The reconnaissance team continues to maintain surveillance, maneuver to the commanding heights, and use sound and light methods to try to find a location of the enemy's artillery positions. Clear. Replies from various teams came over the radio. Chen Chen did not hesitate at all. After packing up his equipment, he immediately began to move north. The Huli position must be abandoned, and the next focus of defense will be shifted, or retreat to the vicinity of Gunong. Only by joining the real main force of the Allied forces there can we form a joint force in the next river-crossing defense battle and block the enemy's real large-scale attack. Otherwise, can we really expect to kill the 2 M2S with 2 toes and then push back? There is still an artillery battalion behind the enemy. Previously, Huli had not been hit by artillery fire because the distance between the 2 sides was too close. They had already taken a huge advantage. Once the other side began to withdraw, there was no doubt that artillery fire would be coming soon. Just as Chen Chen followed Lin He's footsteps and walked forward quickly, the sound of intensive artillery fire arrived as expected. Large caliber shells cut the tree trunks in the jungle on the south side of the village, which were almost as thick as a man's embrace, in half, and the flying dirt and wood chips formed yellow clouds. Boom! Advertisement, the loud noises of explosions continued. Chen Chen tried to distinguish the muffled sound of shells being fired from the artillery position from the noise of the explosions, but unfortunately, he heard nothing. In other words, the enemy's artillery position was at least 5 kilometers away from Huli, and this was a serious indirect shooting. But how did they do it? Without time to think, Chen Chen quickly evacuated to a safe area, and then after occupying the commanding heights, he looked back in the direction of the Huli position. Soon, he discovered the problem from the smoke and dust caused by the explosion. The enemy's bullet impact points are a bit too dense. Of course, to some extent, this is indeed the American style. After all, they are the team that claims to flatten a mountain with artillery shells, and they want to use Van Fleet's ammunition for everything. But the question is, with the resources the Chen army has, can they really afford such intensive firepower output? Instead of carpet bombing like now, it is better to move the targets of each gun away and strike different key points. But why didn't they do that? Because they can't do it. Chen Chen reacted instantly. And then he gave an order into the radio. Scout team, use thermal imaging telescopes to search for high ground on the other side of the river. They have artillery reconnaissance. Their fighting style is the same as ours. They are only professional in artillery reconnaissance. The other artillerymen have only received the simplest training. They can only adjust the parameters according to the given parameters. Find out their artillery reconnaissance team. They can't be too far away from us. Clear. Once you determine the enemy's attack pattern, everything becomes simple. In fact, there are many obstacles between Huli, Gunong, and Hobin, and according to the information provided by Peng Diren before, his position in Hobin was also hit by precise artillery fire. That means that the enemy either has multiple artillery reconnaissance teams, or the artillery reconnaissance team is monitoring from a position where they can visually see all 3 positions. And this position is on the other side of the river, On the hillside, on the only fire tower in the jungle. Target found. There's no way to strike. The distance is at least 6 kilometers. I can only see a vague red signal. Make sure it's there. It's a watchtower. Chen Chen heard the news from the reconnaissance team through his earphones, and his expression changed slightly. 6 kilometers. It is impossible to reach them with any individual equipment. However, Pengdiren also has an M56. The maximum range is 10 kilometers. It can't be said to be more than enough to hit that location, but it is not without a chance. But we only have one chance. If you don't want to let the enemy go after alerting them, you can only kill them with one shot. From the time he joined the battlefield to the time he scared off the first wave of Kachin attacks, Chen Chen had not met Pengdiren. Logically speaking, he should of course meet with Pengdiren to confirm command, exchange intelligence, and get familiar with the personnel, but the tense battle situation did not allow him to take a moment to breathe. If the enemy's artillery is not dealt with quickly, the Allied forces will still lose this river-crossing defense battle. Yes, they have a lot of planes, and their deterrent power is very strong, even making people feel scared at the sight of them. Yes, they have the M2, and possibly even tanks with heavier armor. Once the king of land warfare appears, our side will be almost unable to deal with it. However, these most prominent strength and weakness comparisons from the perspective of an outsider are actually not the main problem at all. No matter from which perspective, the magic weapon that can truly defeat the enemy on modern battlefields is the cannon. The clash between artillerymen is often the backdrop on the battlefield, the fireworks behind the protagonist, and the props to fill in the sound effects. But in real life, it is also the Real god of death who reaps the most lives. Therefore, when there is an opportunity to reduce the combat effectiveness of the artillery or even completely disable the artillery, Chen Chen cannot waste any time. Notify Pengdiren and ask him to prepare the M56. At the same time, concentrate all rockets and aim at our given target. We are going to give them a saturation attack and try to kill them with one strike. Group 4, follow me. Conduct reconnaissance in advance to determine the enemy's deployment position. If necessary, intercept their artillery reconnaissance team. The rest of the teams quickly rushed to the Gunong position, with Baigo in command, to assist the Allied forces in defending the Gunong and Hoban positions. Clear. Replies from various groups came over the radio, and Chen Chen acted quickly, leading the team to maneuver back in the direction they came from. At this time, the artillery attack from Kachin had ended. When passing the Huli position, what Chen Chen saw was a devastated scene. The scope of this position is actually not that large, and the 3 lines of defense are less than 200 meters apart. For the deployment of nearly 300 troops, this position is really too small. And it is precisely for this reason that the casualty rate on the battlefield is alarmingly high. There were wounded soldiers lying everywhere, blood and broken limbs everywhere. When Chen Chen turned the corner of the trench, he subconsciously reached out to support it, but the sticky touch instantly made him retract his hand. There was a piece of intestine hanging on it. The intestines had been mixed with the soil, like a slug that had been dug out of the ground. In fact, Chen Chen is a normal person with weaknesses. At least he feels physiological disgust towards all kinds of slippery creatures. But this time when he actually touched such a thing on the battlefield, he seemed to have been desensitized instantly. Because he knew that behind this touch, what was represented was no longer the aversion to poisons engraved in human genes, but the extremely heavy weight of death. Captain, how do you plan the route? Lenny on the side asked. Chen Chen hesitated for a moment and replied, we still have to cross the river. We first go north along the Nujiang River. About 2 kilometers away, there is a narrow river channel. We swim across from there. The visibility conditions are too good now, and the river crossing process may be discovered. The old soldier following Chen Chen frowned and said, it's already 4 p.m. We still have 2 hours until our scheduled river crossing, when visibility conditions will drop and conditions will be adequate. Clear. The old soldier stopped talking and continued to move forward with Chen Chen. After walking a few dozen meters, they passed by the private soldiers' company of the 7th Brigade, led by Li Bang, to support the Huli position. The morale of these private soldiers was relatively stable. After all, they had not suffered major casualties since they went to the battlefield. It could even be said that they won a great victory as soon as they arrived. But even so, Chen Chen took a quick look and found that this private army camp had suffered considerable casualties. Seeing Li Bang standing by to maintain order, Chen Chen walked over and asked, how many people ran away? Not many, only about 20 or 30. The reason why there are fewer people now is because I sent them to deal with the shortage of people over there. But the Allied forces have almost all fled. There is basically less than 1 person left out of the 10 men in the 2nd Company, and only about half of Pengdiren's guard platoon is left. We are preparing to move to Gunong. It is impossible to hold the Huli position any longer. They are extremely terrified of this place. If the fighting continues and there is another round of artillery fire, these people will all scatter. Clear. Chen Chen nodded slightly and did not raise any questions about Li Bang's deployment. In fact, his move was quite smart, because on the battlefield, once a position suffers heavy casualties, the soldiers defending the position will naturally develop fear for the position itself. This kind of fear needs long-term combat to be eliminated. If the conditions are not met, the best way is to transfer the original soldiers and replace them with other teams. Both sides have a new environment, so the fear value of both sides has basically been refreshed. Be safe. Pay attention to the enemy's movements near the small mountain bridge. Remember to take Tao away. They are likely to attack near the small mountain bridge. Deploy anti-tank missiles in advance. Clear. Li Bang nodded in response, while Chen Chen continued to lead the team forward. After crossing a field, the 10-member team went directly into the jungle. The journey was actually extremely boring. In order to avoid excessive physical exertion, everyone remained silent all the way. Halfway through the journey, when Chen Chen stopped to use GPS to determine his location, Lenny said with a little emotion, I thought the Allied forces really stood up this time, but I didn't expect. This is only the first battle, and hundreds of their men have already fled. If we fight a few more battles, how many of the 3,000 Allied forces will be left? There is no need to fight more. The next time we cross the river, if we still can't silence the enemy's artillery positions, the Allied forces will simply disperse. Chen Chen replied calmly. In fact, he never had much hope for the Allies. The ethnic armed groups in Pubei have a common characteristic, that is, after a certain amount of training, they can play very well and professionally in a favorable situation, but as long as there is a slight headwind, they will enter an avalanche situation that is ready to collapse at any moment. The Allied forces have basically exhausted their passion to defend their homeland by holding on until now. If they cannot win another battle, these people will not even be able to play the role of filling the line of infantry. Hearing his answer, Lenny nodded thoughtfully and asked again, so why is this happening? The Kachins have taken over Laogai, which is their territory. If it were us, we would probably fight back at all costs. It's a very complex issue. Chen Chen shook his head slightly and continued. Of course, from a simple perspective, the most important thing is that they have never won. Or some conspiracy theories. We don't want them to win either. Lenny's expression froze instantly. After a moment, he let out a long sigh and said solemnly, I understand. Because there are some things that can only be done by us. That's right. Advertisement. Chen Chen nodded again, and then gave the order. Pack your gear and get ready to cross the river. At the same time, inside the Allied forces' second command post, Peng Diren, who had recovered, finally heard the first good news from the communicator. But before he could celebrate, Chen Chen's order, which seemed like a child's play, had already been transmitted to him at the same time. He was relatively calm in response to Chen Chen's order, but the adjutant next to him was completely furious. Looking at the communicator who looked determined, the adjutant asked, Are you sure you want to mobilize all the rocket launchers? Just to blow up a watchtower? This is our last heavy firepower. If we use it all up at once, and the Kachins organize a large-scale attack later, we won't have any room to resist. Go and confirm it again. The Dongfeng Corps can't possibly give such a ridiculous order. It's just a watchtower, right? Why don't they just send someone over there? Hearing the adjutant's words, the communicator looked at Peng Diren awkwardly, then turned his gaze back to the adjutant and replied, It has been confirmed. The order is to mobilize all 107 rocket launchers and M56 artillery to fire at the distant watchtower according to the given target. The artillery reconnaissance team will provide coordinates and firing guidance after they get close. Their artillery will be here soon. We will prepare our equipment, and they will lead the artillery fire. After the words fell, the adjutant frowned tightly. After a few seconds of silence, he looked at Peng Diren and asked, Commander, look at this. Peng Diren scratched his head subconsciously, not knowing how to answer for a moment. He actually had some understanding of the style of the Dongfeng Corps. They would use cannons instead of guns and would kill people by bombing them instead of beating them. No matter what the circumstances, they would focus on ensuring safety. But the problem is that our conditions are extremely limited and our ammunition is insufficient. This strategy of using a cannon to kill a mosquito still seems too extravagant. Can we use less? Can we not use rockets and just use M56 for artillery fire? Or, even if they had to use rockets, could they use only half and keep the other half as a precaution? He really wanted to call Chen Chen and ask him his question. But Peng Diren also knew that once Chen Chen's order was given, it would not be questioned. As long as the order is confirmed, asking again would be superfluous. Thinking of this, he said, Don't ask anything. Prepare according to the orders of the Dongfeng Corps. Since they want to give this order, they must have their reasons. Besides, Chen Chen has already told me very clearly that this time we are going to attack the enemy's artillery reconnaissance team. As long as we can pull it out, the enemy's artillery will be completely silenced. The profit from such a fight is only a few dozen rockets. How can it not be worth it? Hit me hard. Clear. The adjutant opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he said nothing and turned around to arrange the equipment. Peng Diren glanced at his departing back, but the worry in his heart was not completely dispelled. What if the enemy has more than one artillery reconnaissance team? What if the enemy's actions are faster than yours? This is a big gamble. If you lose, you will really have nothing. Menka, the fire lookout tower. A well-equipped team was crawling on a tall tower, with a huge antenna like a telephone pole erected beside them. The top of the pole was not a street lamp, but a huge radar. And /TPQ-50, this thing is actually not just an anti-artillery radar, but a serious artillery reconnaissance radar. It can not only conduct a 6,400-degree all-round search of enemy indirect fire, but also track and locate mortars, artillery, and rocket launchers, with a positioning distance ranging from 500 meters to 10 kilometers, which can completely cover the Qingshui River battlefield. In addition, in friendly force mode, this radar can also calibrate its own artillery fire. When the trajectory of its own artillery shells is within the search area, it can provide correction, shooting with an error within 50 meters. It can be said that the combat effectiveness of an artillery team with or without in /TPQ-50 is completely different. Of course, there is more advanced equipment here than just in /TPQ-50. This artillery reconnaissance team has a total of 8 people, 4 of whom are responsible for peripheral surveillance, and 4 are responsible for equipment deployment and reconnaissance guidance. Each of them is wearing the most advanced equipment, from laser rangefinders to individual PDAs. With a simple input of coordinates, they can quickly use the PDA to calculate the shooting elements and quickly transmit them to the rear positions. Within 2 minutes, they can complete an artillery strike. It can be said that they have gone beyond the scope of traditional artillery reconnaissance, and their true positioning is a human version of the integrated mast of the artillery reconnaissance system. The CIA has really invested a lot of money to get such equipment in Pubei, and this investment did bring them rewards. Relying on this mast, they even successfully transformed an artillery battalion that had only undergone the most basic training into a modern artillery battalion that could quickly conduct indirect fire. Such a battle example will inevitably provide new evidence for the theory of equipment winning, and the team stationed here obviously also holds this idea. Lying on a slightly damp wooden floor, a member of the team put down the heavy telescope in his hand and said, I didn't expect that the enemy could actually stop the first round of Kachin's attack. It seems that modern equipment still has an overwhelming effect on the battlefield. You see, they only had a few individual missiles, but they defeated the Kachin army. If we give them an artillery battalion and an artillery reconnaissance system, it's hard to say who will win or lose. Hearing his words, the captain beside him laughed and replied, "These few missiles are actually their limit. The first round of attack is just a test. The next battle will be the final blow." The enemy's attention was probably completely attracted by the planes, armored vehicles, and tanks, and they ignored the artillery fire falling on their heads. This was a huge mistake, and they will pay for it. Maybe they have discovered it? The team member asked back without commenting. If they have already discovered it, then they should at least try to organize an artillery counterattack. As far as I know, they have artillery and rockets. But so far, their rockets have only been fired at targets on the river beach and within visual range. There's nothing we can do. Time is too short. Even the Dongfeng Corps can't save them. No matter what, we have to find their rocket launcher positions as soon as possible. If we don't destroy them, it will be a problem for subsequent attacks. Clear. The team member nodded slightly, and after 2 seconds of silence, he suddenly spoke. "You say, they haven't already targeted us, have they? If they find out where we are, will they just come over and kill us?" Hearing his words, the captain smiled disdainfully, and then said, "Kill us? We are 7 kilometers away from their position. How can we do it? Are we going to use the rockets and small caliber shells they have? Stop messing around. Even if they can find us, they won't be able to hit us. We found the person 2 kilometers away, the coordinates are confirmed. Coordinates have been transmitted, all elements have been solved, and the bombardment can be launched. Sunk ship, please confirm whether to bombard it." Lying in the grass far away from the watchtower, the veteran reported the situation to Chen Chen in a low voice, while Chen Chen stared at the target in the field of view of the telescope, unable to make a decision for a moment. In fact, if nothing unexpected happened, by this time, after they had determined the position of the enemy's artillery reconnaissance team and calculated the attack coordinates, the M56 shells should have already flown to the enemy's heads. But the problem is that Chen Chen saw a strange thing on that watchtower. A huge, cylindrical thing, supported on a tall mast. Although the thing had been camouflaged with various branches and camouflage nets, Chen Chen still recognized what it was at a glance. Artillery detection radar. And it is definitely the most advanced portable artillery detection radar. It was not surprising that this kind of equipment appeared in Pubei. What made Chen Chen feel incredible was how could it appear there so abruptly and conspicuously, as if it was not afraid of the attack of the Dongfeng Corps at all. This looked like a trap because its value is too high. The value is so high that the opponent's current concealment and defense methods are completely incompatible with its value. Chen Chen didn't know what the result of his fire would be, but it seemed that at this moment, he had no other choice but to fire. After hesitating for a few seconds, Chen Chen raised his hand and glanced at his watch. 2.5 hours have passed since the last river crossing defense battle ended. In theory, no matter how slow the Kachin side's response is, they should be able to reorganize their troops, formulate strategies, and prepare to launch an attack. Time is very short for us. If we fail to complete the attack on the frontline artillery reconnaissance positions before the other side launches its next offensive, the other side only needs to launch another suppressive artillery bombardment, and the Allied forces will completely give up resistance. Once they give up resistance, the Hua State Army, which has already begun to mobilize, will immediately change its strategy and no longer go to Qingshui River to provide support. By then, once the Qingshui River is lost, the entire Hua State and northern Shan State will be wide open, and transportation lines will be connected in all directions. It will be extremely difficult to defend them. A small move can affect the entire body, and the battle on the battlefield is sometimes so meticulous. Chen Chen frowned tightly, picked up the thermal imaging telescope, and carefully searched the watchtower above. The heat signature was still too faint to be seen, and due to the lighting conditions, a purely optical search was no longer effective. Time continues to pass, and when it gets completely dark, I will completely lose the chance to make a decision. "Captain, do you want to fight?" the old soldier asked from the side. Chen Chen did not answer directly, but asked back, "Do you think there is something wrong?" Hearing Chen Chen's words, the old soldier nodded immediately, and then replied, "It went very smoothly. It was so easy for us to find them. The artillery reconnaissance team is the most covert team. Even if they have large equipment, they can't be spotted by us at a glance from a few kilometers away. In theory, they would at least have anti-infrared measures in place. Now it looks like a trap, but it's hard to say. If the people on the other side are really catch-ins, they may not have such awareness." "Impossible." Chen Chen immediately shook his head, exhaled slowly, and said, "The other side must have anti-artillery radar, which also explains why the Kachin artillery reacted so quickly. Their strike interval is only 2 minutes at most. If it is manual artillery reconnaissance, no matter how powerful the scout is, it is absolutely impossible to achieve this level. It is necessary to use the integrated mast and data link system to conduct joint calculations at the front and back ends in order to get the results in the first place. In other words, all of their process time is actually spent on adjusting the shooting parameters. 2 minutes is in line with the true strength of the Kachin army. But the problem is, just because they have anti-battery radars doesn't mean what we see is anti-battery radars. This is more like a bait. They try to make it look very hidden, but the underlying logic is totally unsound. If they are really hidden, where can we find them? I feel something is wrong too." As Chen Chen finished speaking, Lin He on the side continued, "The vegetation situation is not right. If they were to transport such a large piece of equipment, it would be impossible for it to have only a small impact on the surrounding vegetation. But if you look at the vegetation near the watchtower, there is no sign of it being cut down. That is to say, they may not have any large equipment there, and that thing may just be a piece of orchid wood." Chen Chen frowned. If he was the only one who felt something was wrong, then it could be a misjudgment on his part as a commander. But if everyone felt something was wrong, then the problem would be serious. So he immediately said, "Contact the rear and ask them to hold off on the attack. Let's keep pushing forward and try to find a way to get over there and take a look. We've come this far. If it's fake, we'll withdraw after verification. If it's true, then give them a close-range beheading." "Clear." The veteran answered immediately, and then, under the leadership of Lin He, the group continued to move forward, advancing quickly and stealthily towards the watchtower. It has to be said that Chen Chen made the right choice in choosing Lin He. In the jungle, the role he can play is unique. The 2-kilometer distance would take at least an hour to cover at normal jungle speed, but Lin He boldly used the animal trails in the woods and the paths trampled by forest rangers, greatly increasing the speed of everyone's advance. According to him, if you're not being tracked, you don't need to try too hard to avoid leaving any traces. This can be considered a trade-off between the pros and cons. It took less than 40 minutes for everyone to advance to a position less than 500 meters away from the watchtower. Through the gaps in the woods, the watchtower appeared in front of everyone in its entirety for the first time. And this time, when Chen Chen raised the thermal imaging telescope again, he immediately discovered the abnormality of the so-called thermal signal. Then this is not a heat signal that can be emitted by humans. It is diffuse, intense, stable, and motionless. It was like someone had buried an infrared searchlight in the branches and deliberately made it an observable target. Shit, there's something wrong. Chen Chen cursed in a low voice. I have to admit that my enemy is indeed cunning enough. If they really launched an artillery attack on this target regardless of the consequences, then in the next second, the enemy's artillery would quickly destroy the already limited long-range firepower positions of the Allied forces. This is a bait. Moreover, there must be more than one such bait. It's a bit troublesome. Contact the reconnaissance team and have them carefully survey the terrain of nearby hills and highlands and find us possible locations for artillery reconnaissance positions. Clear. Advertisement. The veteran answered immediately, and after a brief silence, Chen Chen spoke again. One more thing to add. There is a criterion for determining the position. The coverage range of the anti-artillery radar of the artillery reconnaissance position should be on the trajectory of both the enemy and us at the same time. I suspect that the enemy is not using a simple anti-artillery radar. They may be using an integrated artillery detection system with calibration functions by friendly forces. Clear. The group hid among the woods again. At this time, the sun had completely set, the sky was getting darker and darker, and the woods were already pitch black. Everyone has put on the thermal fusion night vision goggles seized from Indonesia, and all the movements in the forest can be seen clearly. The sound of birds singing was heard everywhere, and even red dots kept flying past Chen Chen's eyes. That was because birds' body temperatures were often higher, which was more obvious in the thermal imaging field of view. While waiting for the reconnaissance team's response, Chen Chen continued to try to search for the enemy near the fake target, but he soon discovered that the other side did not deploy any forces nearby. In that case, why not try to use that as the starting point for the trace? Chen Chen gave orders in a low voice, and then the team followed Lin He's footsteps and quietly approached the watchtower in a fast Z-shaped search formation. As Chen Chen expected, they encountered no resistance. After a round of investigation, Lin He also gave his judgment. Someone has been here before, and the direction is heading due north. But it's been so long, the traces are not obvious, and it may be impossible to track them. If we have a general target, we can use traces as a means of verification. It's enough to be used for verification. Chen Chen immediately gained confidence. At the same time, the intelligence from the reconnaissance team had also been transmitted back. 3 locations were marked on the map, and one of them was just north of the watchtower. After setting the location on the GPS, Lin He set off immediately. Of course, he didn't need GPS before to determine the direction in the forest, but with the help of modern equipment, he was obviously more at ease. After 20 minutes of continuous tracking, Lin He suddenly stopped and raised his hand to make a stop gesture. Chen Chen looked up vigilantly, but from his perspective, he could not see any trace of the enemy. Lin He lowered his body and waited for Chen Chen to get close to him before speaking in a low voice. The traces are becoming denser. This could be a patrol area or an activity area. If we continue forward, there are too many of us and we will be exposed. I'll go check it out first. There's a small river on the left. The team should hide in the river first. Clear. Chen Chen also answered in a low voice. At this point, everyone's radios had gone into silent mode and they couldn't speak loudly, so they could only communicate inefficiently through gestures. But fortunately, everything went well. After turning left, the team followed Lin He to the location of the small river he mentioned. Lin He slowly lowered his body and immersed his whole body in the water. This is the easiest way to reduce the infrared signal. After him, everyone chose their positions and entered the water one by one. The water here is very shallow. Even if you lie down completely, it will only cover your back. This depth is definitely not enough to serve as a cover, but it is perfect for shielding infrared signals. After everyone finished hiding, Lin He gently stood up and went into the forest. The team waited quietly for his action, like crocodiles in the water. However, they did not wait for Lin He, but waited for prey instead. A small heat source suddenly appeared in the woods right in front of Chen Chen. At first, he thought it was just a wild bird flying in the woods, but when the shape of a human body gradually emerged in the hot fusion picture. Enemy. Enemies armed with guns, wearing bulletproof vests, and wearing night vision goggles on their heads. The other person was holding a gun in his hand and was walking parallel to the river. He was not here to fetch water. No one would make such a mistake. He was just on routine patrol. The other party's movements were very light, and his eyes never shifted towards the direction of the stream from beginning to end. Chen Chen quietly held his breath and buried his face in the water, leaving only his eyes exposed. The heat signature of his entire body had been reduced to the lowest level, so even if the other party had thermal imaging turned on, it would be impossible for them to detect him. But at a certain moment, the other party suddenly stopped. Then he raised his gun and pointed it in the direction of the creek. Chen Chen's heartbeat suddenly skipped a beat. Without any hesitation, he immediately stood up and picked up the gun. Exposed, and once exposed, don't even think about hiding. His hand was already on the trigger, and in just half a second, the bullet would be fired, knocking down the enemy who was aiming at him. But someone was quicker than him. A second before he fired, a figure rushed out from behind the enemy, then suddenly covered the enemy's mouth and nose with his right hand, supported the back of the enemy's head with his left hand, and clasped the enemy's right ear with his fingers. With just one exertion of force, the enemy's body collapsed with a crisp sound of his cervical vertebrae breaking. Lin He. It was obvious that he discovered the enemy before Chen Chen. And after Chen Chen and his group were exposed, he took advantage of the narrow window of time when the enemy's attention was diverted and successfully completed a close-range kill. Safety. Lin He made a gesture. Chen Chen carefully held his gun and stood guard, then quickly came in front of Lin He to provide cover. He glanced at the still twitching enemy and asked subconsciously, "How did this guy find us? He didn't even look towards the river. Are there drones? Or other patrol posts?" "No." Lin He shook his head, took off the radio from the enemy, and replied, "We made a mistake and shouldn't have stayed in the water." The sound of the water flow got louder, and it clearly sounded abnormal. But this also shows that this person is very alert and very professional. Their camp is just ahead. "Captain, how do we fight them?" The sound of water leads to exposure. If it weren't for Lin He, this tracking would have been considered a failure. Chen Chen's face was as gloomy as water. Looking at this iconic white face and the M14 EBR on the ground, he said, "I can't fight. Confirm the location and call for artillery support." "Blow them up." Target location confirmed. 30 seconds countdown to start artillery fire arrival. "Clear." Chen Chen replied briefly, then gripped the gun in his hand again and stared closely at the truly hidden tower in front of him. In fact, even from his angle and from a distance of less than 500 meters, he could hardly spot the tower hidden under the dense vegetation. If Lin He hadn't pointed out the passage between the trees and the slightly abrupt wall of trees at the end of the passage, Chen Chen might not have even taken a second look at it even if he stood in front of it. This is what a real artillery reconnaissance position should look like. But now, this position is about to be destroyed. After killing the patrolman, Chen Chen immediately called for artillery support, and within 3 minutes, all the artillery density was adjusted. According to his estimation, after the patrol personnel lost contact, the enemy would need at least 2 minutes to detect the abnormality and 1 minute to make a decision to evacuate or transfer. It is absolutely impossible for them to take away the huge equipment in such a short time. So, the artillery fire would definitely destroy their equipment. Even if the casualties to personnel are limited, the combat objective can be achieved. With 10 seconds left on the countdown, Chen Chen could already see the flaming ladder stretching out behind him. Before the ladder arrived, a brilliant spark exploded from the tree wall in the distance, and then a deafening sound was heard instantly. Boom! The M56 shells hit the target accurately, and at a distance of nearly 7 kilometers, its error was less than 2 meters. This was undoubtedly a great luck. In the case of cold cannon firing, let alone an error of 2 meters, even 20 meters is still within an acceptable range. But sometimes, things develop in unexpected directions, making it hard to predict. The power of this shot directly tore off all the camouflage of the tower, and the real anti-artillery radar was exposed in front of Chen Chen. And at the same time, several weak infrared heat signals were also exposed. That's right, even the Shadow Corps could get anti-infrared camouflage suits. How could these elite soldiers, who were obviously from the Navy SEALs, not be fully prepared? Even after a round of artillery fire, their personnel were still not completely exposed. At this distance, and relying on extremely limited information, the Dongfeng Corps was simply not enough to launch an encirclement and suppression attack on them. But fortunately, after the first howitzer hit the target, the second grenade and dozens of rockets followed. The dense artillery fire instantly covered the entire target area. The flames from the rocket explosions illuminated the jungle and also enveloped the infrared targets that were still moving. Chen Chen lay there unmoved, watching the explosions one after another quietly. He had no urge to go up and take action, because he knew that at this time, any hasty action might completely expose his position, and then he would be hunted down one by the SEALs that survived the explosion. You have to know that they are not some fake mercenary group. Nor are they MPRI or those former Special Forces members under MPRI who have lost the power of the system and whose combat effectiveness is much lower than before. They were real SEALs, masters who could completely defeat the new recruits of the Dongfeng Corps, even if there was only one of them left. There was only one chance to defeat them. That is, to launch an ambush during their retreat. The location where Chen Chen was located was carefully selected by Lin He. If the SEALs wanted to retreat, this was the most convenient, fastest, and most safe route. Now, all the members of the Dongfeng Corps have camouflaged themselves with grass, trees, and soil. As long as the enemy appears in front of them, and as long as they can get close enough, Chen Chen is confident that he can keep them all here. As time passed, the explosions completely stopped. The radio signal has been interrupted, which proves that the other party has turned on the signal jammer and started the retreat process. The Dongfeng Corps uses frequency hopping communications. If the other party wants to block it completely, they must apply high-power electromagnetic interference. This also means that they themselves cannot communicate by radio. The two sides have reached the same level in terms of electromagnetic environment, but this does not become an advantage for either side. The entire jungle had fallen into silence again, as if the explosion had never happened or was just an insignificant episode in this ward. However, just when Chen Chen was even a little disappointed and thought that they had evacuated from other routes, a muffled sound suddenly came from above the head of the veteran not far from him. Bang! Chen Chen turned his head subconsciously, and at this moment, he suddenly realized the danger of his action. In a dark forest, any moving target will become a target of attack. Crack! The typical crisp mechanical sound of a silencer was heard, and Chen Chen's hair stood up instantly. Then, without any time to think, he suddenly rolled to the left. At the same time, the veteran whose helmet was grazed by the bullet from the side also rolled to his right. For consecutive gunshots, which were definitely not dense, came from a distance. The bullets grazed Chen Chen's body at a hair's breadth and penetrated into the jungle soil. The thick tree trunk blocked the path of the bullet, but it also blocked Chen Chen's observation angle. He couldn't raise his gun to fire back, but the other two team members behind him had already opened fire. Bang, 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 violent gunfire rang out, and the bushes in front were shattered into pieces. But within a breath of time, the gunmen hiding in the woods had disappeared without a trace. By the time they stopped firing and crouched down again to observe, it was too late. 2 subsonic bullets hit their necks accurately. Blood gushed out instantly. and they fell in the humid jungle without even having time to say a word. But their lives bought Chen Chen a chance. Within a second of the enemy showing his head, his crosshairs had already locked onto the enemy's position. The trigger was pulled unconsciously, and after a crisp gunshot, the enemy fell to the ground on the spot. Chen Chen's actions had not stopped yet, and his gun was pulled towards another moving target on the side. However, before he fired, the opponent had quickly rushed into the bushes, and Chen Chen lost his sight again. The bullet missed, and Chen Chen fell backward suddenly. The bullet shot at him from somewhere almost grazed his nose. Lenny behind him suddenly supported his unstable body, then with a strong force, quickly threw him to the side where there was plenty of cover. And he himself, taking advantage of the faint light from the other party's gunfire, fired a very short burst of shots. No one knew whether he hit the target or not, but after he fell down again, the surroundings fell into silence again. Chen Chen's heart had sunk to the bottom. He originally thought that he had taken the initiative and was the hunter in the jungle, and the enemy was his prey. Even if the hunting fails, at least one can escape unscathed without taking meaningless risks. But in fact, when they discovered the prey had already discovered them. The reason why those seals did not rush up directly and bite all the Dongfeng Corps members to death was only one reason. They could not locate the positions of all the members of the Dongfeng Corps, so the first shot was just a test. Chen Chen was extremely glad for his decision to arrange the team in a loose formation. Seeing that the situation was getting worse, he was afraid that his team members would act rashly, so he could only take the risk and shout, "Everyone stay hidden! Advertisement, don't move, they can't find us!" As soon as he finished speaking, 2 bullets immediately flew towards Chen Chen. Fortunately, it is not so easy to locate by sound in the jungle, and the opponent does not want to use the continuous firing strategy with the greatest risk of exposure. So the 2 bullets finally only landed at the location where Chen Chen made the sound. But even if it was just this, Chen Chen was already frightened enough. How could they be so fast and so accurate? This has obviously exceeded the limits of what the human body can achieve. Even if your ears are radars, there will at least be an error in positioning. How could they possibly achieve such shooting accuracy that almost every shot hits the target? Has the training of Navy SEALs evolved to such a fantastic level? Or have all of their team members been injected with mutant spider toxins and evolved to the point where they have spider sense? Without time to think about it, Chen Chen quickly found a good position to hide himself again. He knew that his side and the other side were in basically the same situation. They have anti-infrared camouflage uniforms, and our side also used primitive methods. The Dongfeng Corps' radio is not usable, and they are probably silent. Both sides are truly in a dark forest, and the one that is discovered first will inevitably suffer a blow from the darkness. In this situation, even the use of throwing objects becomes a luxury, because you don't know whether the enemy is 50 meters, 20 meters, or 10 meters away from you. Will they really not be able to catch your big move when you pull out the grenade? You can only hold on. Whoever loses patience first will be the loser. But the problem is that the Dongfeng Corps may not have that much time to waste here with them. Let's not talk about how long the homemade anti-infrared camouflage on his body can last. From the overall perspective, the battle on the Qingshui River is far from over. If he is not there and cannot command on the spot, can Li Bang take on the responsibility he should bear? Chen Chen can only trust Li Bang unconditionally, because he knows that the importance of the battle he is facing now may not be much lower than the big battle on the Qingshui River. If he can cause heavy losses to the active members of the Navy SEALs here, the direction of this war may change. Even if it does not force Syosad to withdraw from Kachin, even if it has the opposite effect and further escalates the situation, our side could be considered a winner. Therefore, you must survive and the enemy must die. Chen Chen took a deep breath. He knew that the only advantage he could rely on now was Lin He. Only he can find clues of the enemy's presence in the most complex jungle environment like this. So, Chen Chen simply gave up observing the enemy and instead made a gesture to Lin He, showing him his intentions. "I'll be the bait, and you'll be the cover." Lin He hesitated for 2 seconds and finally made an agree gesture. So Chen Chen moved his body slowly, trying not to shake any vegetation on the ground, and crawled away from Lin He step by step. This process was extremely long. In an hour, the distance he moved did not exceed 10 meters. But it was this 10-meter distance that finally gave him the opportunity to shoot. He carefully picked up a fragmentation grenade, pulled out the pin, and stuck it into the gap between 2 banyan tree aerial roots on the ground. Then he did the same thing and deployed the 3 grenades on his body at intervals of 1 meter. This series of actions consumed another 30 minutes of his time, and during these 30 minutes, a new round of conflict had broken out at the ambush point dozens of meters away from him. It was still a subsonic bullet that opened the fight. The new recruit of the Dongfeng Corps, who was hit by the bulletproof plate counterattacked subconsciously, and his shooting action played right into the enemy's hands. At the moment the gunfire started, 2 bullets hit his chest with incredible precision, fast and fierce. If it weren't for the 4th-level bulletproof plate, the Dongfeng Corps would have suffered its 3rd casualty that night. After falling on his back, the recruit finally remembered Chen Chen's order. He suppressed his instinct and threw himself into another bush, allowing the bullet to pass over his head. And after just a few bullets, the gunfire stopped again. In this round, the Dongfeng Corps did not launch any counterattacks because they could not find the weak gunfire covered by the silencer in the dense jungle. Turn-based game. This somewhat absurd concept flashed through Chen Chen's mind involuntarily, but in fact, it was the most appropriate word to describe the current situation. The enemy had already gained the upper hand, and they were still slowly searching and advancing. Every time they caught any trace of the Dongfeng Corps, they would add another layer to their advantage. They have more experience and stronger combat qualities. The Dongfeng Corps has no means to force them out of the darkness and drag them into the melee that the Dongfeng Corps is good at. They can only fight with the same strategy as them. All the equipment is ready. Chen Chen slowly raised his hand again and made a ready gesture to Lin He. Lin He raised his thumb in response, and Chen Chen gently put the muzzle of the gun under the leaves of the bush and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. Gunshots rang out continuously, and at the moment of pulling the trigger, Chen Chen had already rushed to the left, but this time, the enemy's bullets did not come from in front of him, but from the right rear. At the moment when the bullet passed by his shoulder, Chen Chen twisted his body to complete the gun-holding action. Then, within the reaction time of less than 300 milliseconds, he aimed at the fleeting firelight and pulled the trigger. Immediately afterwards, 2 consecutive crisp metal collision sounds were heard. That was the sound of the enemy's bullet hitting the tree behind him, causing the grenade to fall off and the grip to bounce off. Boom! 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 After 2 consecutive explosions, there was a third explosion. The violent noise disrupted the enemy's judgment. Taking this opportunity, Lenny suddenly stood up, raised his sight, and found the enemy's location. 3 trees in front of the left, a huge rock in front of the right. This is the simplest and, in fact, the most effective method of targeting. Without any hesitation, Chen Chen pointed his gun in the direction indicated by Lin He. In a flash, gunshots rang out, and the enemy fell to the ground. But this time, they did not try to hide. Dense bullets were pouring down towards Chen Chen. He quickly lowered his body to hide. At this time, other members of the Eastern Corps had already opened fire. The sound of M249 gunfire rang out, and the real battle finally began. The sound of DevGru B squad firing machine guns was like a signal. All the mercenaries of the Dongfeng Corps tore off their camouflage and fired wildly at all the firing points they could see. At this time, Chen Chen's foresight was fully demonstrated. If there were no IFF signs in this extremely complex battlefield environment, the Dongfeng Corps might even fire at its own people and then destroy itself. But even so, the Dongfeng Corps still did not have an advantage in the melee. The reason was simple. The SEALs had already surrounded most of the Dongfeng Corps. This is the real reason why they took action. Although they could not find a specific location of the Dongfeng Corps members, they inferred from the combat intentions of both sides and the basic principles of war that they had woven a big pocket and put the original pocket of the Dongfeng Corps back in. Now, of the only 9 people left in the Dongfeng Corps, 6 have been wrapped in the pocket, and when they are exposed, each of them will be subject to crossfire from at least 3 directions. The dense bullets made it impossible for everyone to raise their heads. If it weren't for the dense trees and many shelters nearby, and the 4-level bulletproof vest that could barely withstand the shooting of large-caliber bullets, the Dongfeng Corps would be wiped out in just the first round of strangulation. Use throwing objects. Chen Chen shouted loudly. His voice exposed his position, and bullets from 2 directions were immediately directed at him. But what surprised Chen Chen was that this time, the SEAL's accuracy in locating positions by sound seemed to be decreasing. Perhaps the chaotic gunfire interfered with the other party's judgment? Without time to think, Chen Chen suddenly rushed to the side, but he did not expect that the land to his side was not solid ground, but a huge hole caused by rotting tree roots and soil erosion. His body immediately sank into a deep pit, and the humus directly submerged his chest. But fortunately, the density of this thing was not very high, so he did not fall into the dilemma of being unable to move. But even so, it is impossible to escape in a short period of time. Without any hesitation, Chen Chen threw all the smoke bombs he had. At the same time, smoke bombs thrown by other members of the Dongfeng Corps had exploded, and smoke was surging everywhere in the dark woods. Yes, smoke cannot block the detection of thermal imaging night vision goggles, but it can indeed make the low-light mode ineffective. Chen Chen clearly felt that after the smoke bomb exploded, the enemy's firepower density dropped by 1 level. It was obvious that this SEAL team had re-entered the stage of observation and waiting, and the current shooting was only to suppress the actions of the Dongfeng Corps within the encirclement. If you want to break through and fight back, this is your only chance. Concentrate firepower and break out to the north. Chen Chen said this in Sichuan dialect. He was not sure whether there were any SEALs who were proficient in Chinese, but the magic of Sichuan dialect was that when it appeared in the form of short sentences, most people in the north who were proficient in Chinese could understand its meaning. But if you were a non-native speaker, it is not so easy to understand. After the order was given, all team members immediately began to assemble, and this action was indeed beyond the SEALs' expectations. The Eastern Corps' advantages in sustained firepower and continuous firepower were finally brought into play. Even though they did not have an advantage in information, the density of bullets made up for the lack of observation. After the 5 people closer to the north gathered, they relied on a round of resolute assaults to successfully advance 50 meters to the north and break through the SEALs' pocket. In the process, they once again killed and injured the SEALs. Of course, they also paid a price. In a distance of just 50 meters, 2 people fell down, and their lives or deaths were unknown. Now, there are only 7 people left in the Dongfeng Corps, and judging from the location where the SEALs fired, their number will not exceed 10. There is no significant difference in the number of people between the 2 sides. As for who can survive, it depends on who is stronger, faster, and more fearless. At this time, due to the breakout of 5 people on the north side, the Eastern Corps finally changed the disadvantageous situation of being surrounded, and the enemy, in our side, re-entered the chaotic fighting formation with each other in a jagged pattern. Both sides have their backs and sides exposed. The flash hider can eliminate some of the flames, but it is absolutely impossible to completely hide their whereabouts. As long as anyone on the side opens fire, they will be immediately caught by the outer enemies who have a good field of vision. The situation is finally improving, but that's only in the overall situation. As for Chen Chen himself, he had fallen into an extremely dangerous situation. His command revealed his importance. After his approximate position was locked, dense bullets kept flying over his head, completely suppressing his movements. The reason why it has not been hit until now is partly due to luck and partly because the deep pit is located below the horizon, unexpectedly forming a relatively complete shelter. But as the enemy's encirclement narrowed, it was only a matter of time before he was caught. If he were incapacitated on the battlefield, there would be no need to fight this war. Chen Chen struggled desperately to get out of the deep pit, which was actually not too difficult. However, it only delayed him for 10 seconds, and the continuous firepower was cut off for less than 10 seconds before a chain reaction like an avalanche occurred. The SEALs on the periphery pressed forward again and seized the bunker with an excellent view. The 4 people left on the south side were completely surrounded. Apart from relying on grenades to block the enemy's attack, they had no means of counterattack. There are also advantageous terrains in jungle fights. The vegetation grows densely, the terrain is high and low, and the field of vision is wide and narrow. The seals occupied the advantageous terrain with great accuracy. Yes, they had already surveyed the area a long time ago, but the problem was that even so, they shouldn't have been able to fight so smoothly. Chen Chen's mind was spinning rapidly, and he quickly went over all the details from the battle between the two sides to the present. It is normal for the other party to discover your position first. In jungle warfare, who discovers whom first is often not a technical issue, but a matter of luck. Priority discovery does not bring much advantage, because you can only find one at most. This is indeed the case. After the veteran was shot, the Dongfeng Corps immediately counterattacked and caused casualties to the seals. Until that time, the two sides were evenly matched. The real disadvantage was caused by the short-lived Dark Forest offensive. It was the seals who established their advantage by using their super perception of the battlefield environment. But where does this perception come from? Sound. It can only be sound. Stun grenades. Who has stun grenades? Throw them all. Chen Chen risked shouting again. His voice completely exposed his position, and the enemy's bullets became more accurate, with a ricochet bullet even grazing his neck. Fortunately, he had a neck guard. Then, dense explosions of stun grenades sounded. Even in the woods, the sound was surprisingly loud. The decibel value of this thing is much higher than that of a grenade, and its effect can be said to be immediate. Of course, this immediate effect was not discovered by Chen Chen himself, but by the perception of the three people who had already broken out of the encirclement. Before the stun grenade exploded, the seals' reaction speed was astonishingly fast. As long as they opened fire, the enemy would be able to lock onto their position basically within 1 second, and no matter how they ran or hid, it would be of no avail. But after the stun grenade exploded, the other party's reaction speed slowed down significantly. They need to judge, search, and verify, and the time is more than 3 seconds. This is a normal range. After all, even at the maximum human speed, it would take at least 3 to 4 seconds to search for a suspicious target within a 120-degree angle in the jungle based on the source of the sound. If it is at night and there are no obvious infrared indications, it could take more than 10 seconds. Seals have an advantage in both training and equipment. The level of 4 seconds is truly logical, and there is no supernatural perception. In this way, the strength gap between the two sides was completely narrowed. The Dongfeng Corps' consistent equipment arrangement of firepower advantage theory finally played a decisive role. Now the three members on the north side have 3 real machine guns in their hands. No matter how powerful your M14 is, can it really compete with a machine gun? 20 seconds later, when Chen Chen finally climbed out of the deep pit and organized suppressive shooting at the enemy in front, the 3 members on the north side also achieved new results. 2 seals who tried to evacuate and gain distance were caught, and the bullets caught up with them through the gaps in the trees and knocked them to the ground. Their fall caused the entire seal offensive to begin to collapse. In an instant, the wireless communication was fully restored, and Chen Chen heard the voices of other team members communicating with each other. Without any hesitation, he immediately gave the order into the radio. Maintain firepower advantage and continue to suppress. Lin He, find a reliable observation position and mark the enemy's position. Clear. The restoration of communications boosted everyone's morale. Command became effective, and actions became orderly. After confirming the relative positions of everyone, Chen Chen quickly made adjustments, arranging the 7 people into 3 groups to provide alternating cover and stabilize the defense line in the first place. 4 light machine guns act as firepower hubs and provide cover, while 3 rifles serve as the main shooters for precise harvesting. After 2 minutes of stalemate, a machine gunner of the Dongfeng Corps was knocked down by 4 grenades thrown at him in a dense manner, while a pitcher of the seal was killed accurately by Chen Chen at an incredibly fast speed. This shot completely shattered the seal's confidence. From the beginning of the war to now, despite having a comprehensive advantage, they have already lost 5 people. This is definitely a heavy loss that they cannot afford. Now they're in a dilemma. Fight? Not necessarily win. Leave? Who would be willing to leave with such a loss? No, they were not in a dilemma. They began to retreat. The distance of the gunshot had obviously become farther, and Chen Chen's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Then he said, "Retreat! Retreat! Retreat! Their plane is coming! Take the wounded away! Find a body, and take it away! Found it!" Hearing the veteran's voice coming from the headset, Chen Chen started running without stopping. He knew that his team was already more than a minute behind the seals. They were also running, and there was absolutely no way they could call for air support before they were out of the danger zone. Because they can't use ordinary bombs. To destroy the evidence, there was only one thing they could use. Napalm. The power of this thing is too uncontrollable. It can't distinguish between friend or foe and can burn a large area. They won't take the risk, but they will definitely use this thing to cut off the Dongfeng Corps' whereabouts. The remaining 6-member team of the Dongfeng Corps plus 1 seriously injured soldier completed the reunion, and then began to rush south under the leadership of Lin He. But at this moment, the roar of propellers was heard in the sky, and then a huge ball of fire suddenly ignited less than 200 meters in front of them. This precise distance control almost completely blocked the Dongfeng Corps' hope of escape. Their only choice was to turn north, but there were not only seals there, but also the possibility of another round of napalm bombing. What to do? Go ahead, trust me, go ahead. Lin He yelled. Don't be ridiculous. This is napalm. Not an ordinary forest fire. We can't get through. 200 meters. If we walk along the riverbank, the fire won't burn that fast. There's no chance to turn back. We can only rush forward. This is a difficult decision. Continuing south would mean risking your life. But if you go north, there is a high probability of chronic death. Who knows if the seals are there to support them? Who knows if there's a trap over there? It seems that Chen Chen has no other choice. Lin He's next words made him immediately choose to believe the other party. The wind is blowing in the wrong direction. The fire will burn eastward. Let's go along the river. Follow Lin He. At the command, everyone moved forward quickly. It took them less than 5 minutes to cover the distance of 200 meters. The fact is, just as Lin He said, this fire belt did not completely block the Dongfeng Corps' path. The nearest fire point was less than 20 meters away from the stream. The hot air was enough to singe the hair, but after getting their bodies wet, all of them rushed through the fire belt and reached the southern side of the jungle. Escape. It was almost a rout, but in another sense it was a triumph. The panting veteran dropped the seal's body. When he carried the man on his back, the man was still struggling. Since Chen Chen said he only wanted the body, the veteran shot the seal in the forehead without hesitation. Now he is dead. At this time, the second and third rounds of napalm bombs had been dropped, and the entire forest had turned into a sea of fire. The flames illuminated the night sky of Pubei red. Black smoke rose straight into the sky, and the scene was like doomsday. Chen Chen took 2 deep breaths and then lowered his head. Looking at the helmet on the man's head and the equipment on the helmet, he finally understood why the Eastern Corps fought so passively in this battle. Damn, it's really a seal. This is not just any seal. This is Devgrabi. What is Devgrabi? The old soldier asked at the side. Chen Chen frowned and replied, the Black Squadron of SEAL Team 6 is a reconnaissance group, and their equipment is different from the 4 attack groups of red, gold, blue, and silver. Then how do you know they are the Black Team? How do you know? Chen Chen sneered and did not answer immediately. To be honest, generally speaking, it is really difficult to tell which squadron the Devgra members are from, but the current situation is a bit special, because from the man's head, he saw an extremely special piece of equipment. 16-way individual anti-sniper radar. Although this thing is called an anti-sniper radar, it is actually a sound wave detection system. It locates the direction of gunfire through the sound wave differences monitored by 16 microphones, thereby achieving the purpose of quickly searching for the enemy in complex infrared and natural light environments. This equipment was in 2011. Besides Devgrabi, who else can use it? Anyway, now we have the evidence. They directly intervened in Pubei's affairs and sent active special forces. Just for this reason, they can't clear themselves from blame. Although they will most likely not admit it and will most likely try to find a way to cover it up, at least we have the initiative. Go back first and preserve the body. Maybe this corpse will be of great use in the end. Let's go retreat. It's getting late. The Kachin army should launch a second round of attack. Hurry up. Clear. The order was given for everyone to evacuate towards Nujiang River. According to the plan, they will return along the original route after crossing the Nujiang River, head eastward along the Qingshui River, and finally return to the Gunong position. No one asked about the bodies of their teammates, because they all knew that in such a high-intensity conflict, it was unrealistic to expect to leave an intact body for your comrade. It was extremely lucky to be able to save the seriously injured soldier. However, the seriously injured soldier did not survive in the end. He had just arrived at the Nujiang River and had not yet had the chance to cross the river when he breathed his last. Chen Chen didn't even have the chance to ask him for his last words. After he started his journey, he had been in a coma, relying solely on large doses of adrenaline to maintain his basic heartbeat. Chen Chen did not think about what would happen if Ping Xuan was here, because he knew that with the penetrating brain injury of the injured man, no one could save him. This was the 5th teammate the Dongfeng Corps lost that night. From any perspective, it was a heavy casualty. The reason why the whole army was not annihilated was due to both Chen Chen's risky move that hit the key point and luck. The feud between the two sides has been completely formed. In Pubei, the Eastern Corps and SEAL Team 6 will inevitably have another battle. Chen Chen doesn't know when this battle will take place. He doesn't have time to think about this now, because, just as he expected, the second round of Kachin offensive had already begun on the other side of the Hoban Hill Bridge. After crossing the Nujiang River, before Chen Chen had time to catch his breath, he had already seen a continuous line of flames rolling from the distance to Hoban. That was the enemy's artillery battalion bombing. But judging from the density and accuracy of the artillery fire, the efficiency of this round of bombardment was incomparable to the efficiency of the previous bombardment. As expected, Devgru could not be guarding an ordinary target. They were indeed the key to the qualitative change in the combat effectiveness of the Kachin army's artillery. Now, this key point has been destroyed, which means that the Kachin advantage has lost the most important link. In this situation, are they still going to launch a violent attack? Or has their commander decided to go all out? Chen Chen's pace quickened. Half an hour later, he returned to the Huli position. The battle here was equally fierce, but Chen Chen could tell at a glance that this part of the battle was a pure feint. Li Bang, report your position. Chen Chen called out on the radio, and after a brief pause, Li Bang replied, shipwreck. I'm in Hoban. The enemy is feinting in the direction of Huli. I have readjusted the focus of defense. Currently, Hoban is under great defensive pressure. The Allied forces have lost too many men, and the defensive force has dropped to less than 1,500 men. The defensive pressure is enormous. We are considering blowing up the bridge and sinking the ship. We are waiting for your decision. Hearing Li Bang's words, Chen Chen's brows immediately frowned. 1,500 people? A few hours ago, when he left, the Allied forces still had more than 2,000 and close to 2,500 people. And now, the Kachin side has just launched an attack, and the number of people has dropped by 1,000? It is obvious that these people are definitely not normal combat casualties. They are simply deserters. This is too vulnerable, but there is no other way. All Chen Chen can do now is to rely on the strength of these 1,500 people to block the second round of Kachin's attack. The first batch of reinforcements from Hua State will arrive soon. They will not bring a large number of manpower this time, but they can bring a batch of the most critical and scarce equipment. The anti-tank missiles that Xiaoyu promised, and a large number of rocket launchers. These things may not completely solve the problem of insufficient armored forces, but at least they can form an effective deterrent to the Kachin side, so that they dare not use armored units to attack recklessly. However, this is all for the future. Now, he has to decide whether to blow up the bridge. If Prung Diren did not blow up the bridge in the beginning in order to delay the Kachin, then now their goal has been achieved. Without further consideration, Chen Chen decisively said, Blow up. Blow up the bridge. Clear. As soon as Chen Chen finished speaking, 10 seconds later, in the distance, on the small hill bridge in Hoban, a huge ball of fire shot up into the sky. The explosives had been arranged long ago, and the fuses had been buried long ago. There was no such thing as sacrificing one's life heroically to blow up a bridge. The death squad prepared by Peng Diren was ordered to evacuate after blocking the Kachin army for 35 minutes, and they pressed the detonation switch. This bridge, which had witnessed countless storms and was built with aid from the north, was reduced to ashes in an instant. The Kachin army on the north side of the bridge watched in horror as the commandos who had already boarded the bridge fell into the river in the explosion. They had not expected that the Allied forces would be so hostile as to blow up the last bridge over the Qingshui River, and they had not expected that the enemy, who had clearly made a desperate effort to defend the Shaoshan Bridge, would end up in such a hasty manner, but this did not affect their attack. 3M, two armored vehicles appeared and disappeared on the north bank of the Qingshui River, pouring fire on the Allied positions on the south bank. The last assault boat covered more than a dozen speedboats and civilian ships, and shuttled back and forth on the Qingshui River under the cover of night, sending batches of infantry to the south bank. With their huge firepower advantage, their crossing operation encountered almost no effective hindrance. Armored vehicles can't pass? It's okay. The armored vehicles don't need to go there at all. Chen Chen saw from afar that fierce fighting had begun near the Gunong position. The first group of Kachins who landed were private soldiers with strong combat effectiveness. With just a charge, they had already taken down the first line of defense of the Allied forces, and continued to advance forward like a sharp knife, trying to pierce the entire Gunong position. Unfortunately, they did not get what they wanted, because in the middle of the position is an indestructible reef. A group of Dongfeng Corps, led by Bai Go, and 50 private soldiers from the 7th Brigade. Whether in terms of firepower or fighting will, these soldiers were not on the same level as the Allied forces. Even under the harassment of 2 propeller fighters in the air, they easily repelled the attack of the Kachin army and pushed them back to the riverbank. Seeing this scene, Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief. But he knew that the enemy's armored firepower problem must be solved. Otherwise, even if they continued to send troops to the shore and cross the river in rounds, they would eventually erode all the Allied positions. The core is not casualties or battle losses, but morale. Advertisement while rushing to the Gunong position. Chen Chen ordered on the radio, Li Gang, deploy the Tau. Find a way to destroy one of the armored vehicles. Understood. I'm in the process of making arrangements. Reconnaissance team, give me the exact coordinates. There is no window to fire. The other side is very cautious. Feedback from the investigation team came quickly, and the fact was just as they said, the 3 Kachin armored vehicles did not expose any window for the Dongfeng Corps to open fire and destroy them. The real use of armored units is not to rely on the armor to withstand all damage and then fight like ruffians, destroying each other with punches and kicks. That is what second-rate warlords like Zhao Zhaoyang would do. With the guidance of an expert, the Kachin army's 3-2 M2s fought very smartly. An M2 equipped with an automatic grenade launcher relied on the bunker to continuously bombard the Allied positions on the reverse slope, while the other 2 shuttled between houses and woods. Whenever they received an infantry signal, they would emerge from the bunker with high mobility, use the fire control radar to quickly lock the target and open fire, and then enter the next bunker for concealment. The time they were exposed would not exceed 20 seconds. And due to the unpredictability of direction and position, it was basically impossible for the Dongfeng Corps to lock them with Tau. Seeing that 4 of the few heavy machine gun positions of the Allied forces had been taken out in succession, Chen Chen couldn't help but feel anxious. However, the difficulties faced by the Allied forces were far more than this. Just as the M2 had established the advantage of fire suppression, an A-29 in the air finally found its target and dived down, pouring all the dense machine gun shells into a group of buildings. The headquarters is under air attack. Peng Diren, report the situation. Though we can still retreat. Chen Chen's heart sank. If Kachin could accurately find the location of the headquarters, he would definitely continue to track and monitor the periphery of the headquarters. This plane cannot be an ordinary propeller plane. It must be equipped with a trap observation system. If Peng Diren withdraws now and is exposed outside the building, he will surely be greeted with an explosive air-to-ground attack. Be careful to hide. Don't expose the infrared signal. Chen Chen immediately reminded him, and Peng Diren also reacted and replied calmly. We are still in the house. I can't continue to command. The command is handed over to you. Understood. Li Bang will take over the command. Clear. After a series of brief conversations, the command of the Allied forces was transferred. But Chen Chen didn't relax at all. There's no way, it's too difficult to beat. The Allied forces were at a disadvantage in almost every aspect, and there was almost no hope of breaking the deadlock. If the enemy's artillery had not been basically disabled, the battle would have been over at this point. In fact, the only chance for the Allied forces now is to hold on until the enemy's planes run out of fuel, until the enemy runs out of ammunition, and until support from Wastate arrives. But this is totally impossible. This is the Allied army, but what if they're not volunteers? Chen Chen's mind raced. At this time, he had already arrived at the Gunong position and saw the white dog stationed there. The latter's face was covered with dust, but his spirit was quite excited. Perhaps, as he said before, this is a real opportunity to make a contribution. However, no matter how excited he was, he could not change the fact that the Allied forces were losing ground. The first line of defense has been completely lost. If the enemy is allowed to break through the sandbar at the confluence of the Nujiang River and the Qingshui River and establish a beachhead, the Gunong position can be completely abandoned. Captain, we must cut off the opponent's attack route. Their ship is the key. We must destroy their ferry boats. Otherwise, even if they send us ants, we will be bitten to death. There are too many non-combat casualties. The morale of the army is about to collapse. I don't even know I need to fight a boat. Chen Chen raised his gun and knocked down the 2 Kachin soldiers who had rushed in front of him, then quickly moved 2 positions and continued to shout. We don't have heavy weapons. There is no way to cause effective damage to the ship. It's too dim now, and I can't shoot accurately at all. The heavy machine gun positions were suppressed, and the firing efficiency was low. What can you do? Where is the fuel that Peng Diren prepared? It's useless now. It was blown up before the battle even started. We want to attack the boats. We want to advance to the sandbar and establish a position. Assault rifles can also deal damage at close range. We must not let them continue to send people over here. By Go threw a grenade, and the advantage of the Russian-made big cannon in the defensive battle was fully revealed. 3 Kachin soldiers who were too close were knocked down instantly, and the offensive that had been organized was repelled again. The intensity of the conflict was clearly decreasing, but Chen Chen knew that this was not because the other party had given up. On the contrary, this is the final silence, a sign that the other party is accumulating strength. We must deal with it immediately, and White Dog's plan is indeed feasible. The only problem is that establishing a position on the sandbar means completely exposing ourselves to the enemy's heavy firepower and having to deal with enemies from the left and front at the same time. This is a life-for-life approach, but a careful consideration will reveal that this is also the only way to fight. If we continue to hold on, the rate of non-combat casualties will exceed the rate of battlefield casualties. Let them die, or let them run. A merciful army is not suitable for generals, but when faced with this problem, Chen Chen couldn't do it without hesitation. Raising his gun again and knocking down an enemy who was lying on the ground pretending to be dead but was actually aiming at him secretly, Chen Chen said, "You lead the men to charge. Use smoke bombs for cover and establish a sandbar position." "Clear." White Dog answered immediately, and then he gave the same order to all the soldiers in the rolling position. 2 minutes later, under the leadership of the Dongfeng Corps and the 7th Brigade's private soldiers, a loose counterattack was officially launched. From Chen Chen's perspective, this counterattack was fought without any momentum. Everyone was running forward slowly under the cover of smoke bombs, and their movements were even a little stumbling. But this is the norm on the battlefield. This is the norm in Pubei. 3 minutes later, the Allied troops who were originally in the trenches arrived at the sandbar, found cover, and quickly established defenses. Those ordinary soldiers didn't know what they were going to face, but soon, after the smoke cleared, they found that their commander had put themselves in a desperate situation. Unprecedented intensive gunfire sounded, and this time, no one escaped. Because they can't run away. The rolling sandbar position became a real meat grinder. Here, neither side had solid cover to rely on. In the flat terrain, the Kachin army that had already landed was surprised to find that the gunfire was not coming from the position directly in front of them, but from their side. It must be said that the flank attack tactic is often effective. After the sandbar position was established, the Allied forces led by Go did cause heavy casualties to the Kachin army that had no cover on the flank in a short period of time. After a round of preliminary shooting, at least dozens of Kachin soldiers fell on the spot, and on the 2 speedboats that had just docked, the Kachin soldiers who had not even had time to get on the ground were also quickly knocked down. The speedboat driver was also knocked down at the same time. Just as Go said, they did succeed in hitting the boat with an assault rifle at close range. This is a good signal, but it only lasted for less than 2 minutes. As all the smoke cleared, the Allied forces on the sandbar position were completely exposed to the heavy firepower on the opposite bank. Planes were dive bombing, M2s were clearing out targets, and the Kachin army, which had stabilized on the left, was still exerting pressure. 2 minutes later, the Allied forces, which numbered less than 500, had lost more than 100 men, and these 100 men were all real casualties. Once the fierce battle started, there was no way to stop it. With no way out, the weak militia of the Allied forces were forced to fight to the end. They knew that their only hope of survival was to defeat as many enemies as possible. If you don't want to die, then let others die. In desperate situations, human potential has been stimulated to the limit. Adrenaline quickly fills everyone's body. The feeling of fear temporarily fades away, and only one thought remains in their minds. Stay alive. How could they survive? They could no longer run away, because the Kachin landing troops had already surrounded them, and the road they came from was already filled with dense gun muzzles. If you want to run back, you have to kill these people first. Go's evil plan was largely successful. Those soldiers who wanted to escape invisibly consumed the manpower of the Kachin landing troops, while those who were able to stay effectively restrained the Kachin boats crossing the river. 5 minutes later, the Kachin crossing operation was temporarily stopped, replaced by rounds of heavy firepower strafing and dive attacks from the air to the ground. The Allied casualties reached an unprecedented level. Every time a plane flew over, it would use its steel wings to harvest more than a dozen lives. Every time the M2 appeared, it would destroy a newly established continuous firepower point. The 500 people melted and disappeared as quickly as mud in water. Less than 10 minutes after the sandbar position was established, the casualties had reached an astonishing 200. This seemed to be a major strategic failure, but both Chen Chen and Go could see that the turning point of this defensive battle had already appeared. As long as the other party stops crossing the river, it will be impossible to restart. At least, in this campaign, a restart is impossible. Li Bang, lead the team to support Gunong. I see the M2 continues to be exposed. When can the anti-tank position be bang? Before Chen Chen finished speaking, an M2 that had been exposed for more than half a minute in an attempt to cause casualties suddenly exploded. The BGM-71E high explosive and high penetration model of the TOW anti-tank missile directly hit the target. Then a violent martyrdom explosion occurred, and a brilliant firework bloomed on the river beach. The fire even illuminated the sandbar position on the other side of the river. This scene made everyone stunned for a moment. Immediately afterwards, the Allied forces, whose pressure was suddenly reduced, launched their first counterattack after entering the sandbar position. The commando team, led by the Dongfeng Corps, made an arc to the south. The team of less than 20 people used double arrow attack formations and cooperated with extremely skilled 3-3 tactics to exert unparalleled suppression power. After just one encounter, The already stable Kachin army beachhead position was quickly shaken. The pressure on the Allied army's sandbar position suddenly decreased, and they began to maneuver westward and to the left simultaneously, actively closing the distance with the beachhead position and seeking hand-to-hand combat. This is the best strategy to reduce the threat of the enemy's long-range heavy firepower, and it is obvious that this strategy has worked. However, this does not mean that the firepower points on the other side of the river can be completely shelved. 5 minutes later, Li Bang, who arrived in a few vehicles, took their place. 4 machine gun pickups, 2 recoilless guns, and an automatic grenade launcher. Advertisement, they poured firepower on the other side at all costs, without any regard for the so-called sustainability of the firepower. Kachin's beachhead was in jeopardy, and at this time, Chen Chen made an extremely critical decision. Release the interception on the west side, and let them evacuate from the west side. He did not want to kill all the Kachin troops on the beachhead because he knew that they were a bargaining chip. If he took this chip away, the Kachin army, who were desperate to gamble, would continue to bet at all costs and try to win back what they lost. Only by letting go of this chip can everyone quit while they are ahead. Don't they want Huli? Give it to them. So, under the command of Chen Chen, the Allied forces at the Shazhou position gave up the pursuit of the Kachin army and only restabilized the defense line after cutting off the river crossing route. At the same time, the second M2 appeared, and the Dao was also fired instantly. Unfortunately, the missile hit the civilian house in front of the M2, which was used as a shelter, and did not cause any damage. The recoilless gun that was fired directly at the target was also deflected by its side armor and failed to penetrate it. But that's enough. The commander of Kachin seemed to realize the seriousness of the problem, especially after Chen commanded the air defense team to seize the opportunity to launch 4 consecutive Zhen 1 missiles at the A-29 in the sky. His psychological defense line was finally broken. Chen Chen didn't know what he was thinking, let alone the mental process behind his decision. Perhaps the desperate attitude of the Allied forces made him realize that further fighting would cause too much casualties, or perhaps he thought he could stop while he was ahead since he had already captured the Huli position. In any case, the intensity of the exchange of fire between the two sides dropped in an instant. As the two planes left and the Allied forces retreated to the Gunong position, the Kachin army did not choose to pursue them, but instead regrouped in Huli and captured the Huli position, where only a few Allied forces were stationed. It was 12 o'clock midnight, and both sides stopped fighting temporarily. At this time, the situation at the rolling battlefield was so tragic that it was impossible to watch. The Qingshui River had been completely dyed red with blood, and hundreds of corpses were lying on the white sandbar. The Allied forces' casualties have already exceeded half, but the good news is that those who have stayed behind are unlikely to run away again. Chen observed the battlefield silently. This was the first real battle he experienced as a commander. Over the radio, Peng Diren, who had already moved to the safe zone, passed on the latest information to him. The Allied forces were reduced to only 600 men. There were more than 500 casualties, and the rest all ran away. When the tide washes away the sand, only a few are destined to remain. In the next battle, the Kachin could easily cross the Qingshui River and completely annihilate the Allied forces. This is definitely bad news. But of course, there's good news. The Hua State Army finally arrived. Only 200 people, but they brought the equipment that Chen Chen needed most. 20 Vanguard 2s and 200 rockets of various types for individual soldiers. The stuff has arrived, and Qingshui River can basically be defended. What you have to do next is very simple. Give the rockets to people who know how to use them, deploy them to the front line, and then bomb the ships crossing the river without restriction. It's impossible for them to get too many ships in a short period of time. As long as we inflict enough damage on them, they will retreat on their own. As for the individual air defense missiles, Li Bang, you will be in charge of all of them. Clear. In the command post, which had changed its position 3 times, Chen Chen quickly carried out the next combat deployment. It has to be said that after the arrival of large quantities of rockets, the defensive pressure on the Allied forces was indeed reduced a lot. However, due to the sharp reduction in available troops, the strength comparison between the Kachin and Allied forces has not actually changed much. It is certainly irresponsible to talk about certain victory at this time. Therefore, Chen Chen did not arrange the plan too radically, but took a steady approach, intending to completely crush the Kachin army's plan to cross the river, block them north of the Qingshui River, and make their blitzkrieg tactics come to nothing. Peng Diren had no objection to his arrangement, because he knew very well that, regardless of whether his physical condition could support the subsequent command, even if he could, with his ability, it would be impossible for him to lead the team to victory in this defensive battle. Only by handing the people over to Chen Chen, the Allied forces would have a chance of survival. Of course, they could also choose to retreat completely, or even throw themselves into the arms of Kachin. But Peng Diren could not be willing to accept this. After all, a bigger future was in front of him. Who would be willing to continue to be a dog that eats shit when they have the opportunity to be a wolf that eats meat? After completing the transfer of all command rights, Peng Diren left the command room in a cool manner and simply returned to the marching tent to recuperate. He didn't have much communication with Chen Chen, but after he left, Li Bang came to Chen Chen and said with a frown, "It's still hard to beat. This batch of equipment is a timely help, but we have too much snow right now. According to the current reconnaissance results, there are at least 3,000 Kachin troops along the Qingshui River, and relying on the established logistical supply lines, there will be a steady stream of troops and equipment delivered. The Allied forces can no longer hold on. Huli has already been lost. The next round of attack will definitely be the decisive attack. We have no chance of stopping the Kachin. This is an objective law that cannot be broken. Maybe we can hold them off for 3 or 5 more days, but that doesn't mean much. 3 days will be enough." Chen Chen waved his hand and said to Li Bang, "The victory or defeat of Qingshui River does not depend on the victory or defeat of the war itself, but on the victory or defeat with expectations. The reason why we have to defend this point is to let other warlords in Pubei know that even with the help of the Americans, the Kachin are not invincible. We, the 7th Brigade, the 756th Brigade, and the Allied forces alone cannot defeat Kachin. We need Hua State to join the game, and we need all other forces to join the game. Other forces, including the Hua state, have a very obvious characteristic. That is, they will help whoever wins. Is it the same in Hua state? Li Bang asked with a frown. Of course, why else do you think they're so slow? Now, Bao Xiaomei and Bao Youxiang are arguing to the point of no return. From a vision point of view, Bao Xiaomei is better than Bao Youxiang, but the foundation of Hua state was built by Bao Youxiang, so he is more inclined to maintain the status quo. It is not difficult to understand, right? That I thought what was already our ally. How could it be possible? Hua state does not belong to Bao Xiaomei, nor does it belong to Bao Youxiang alone. Beside him, there is Bao Yuliang, and below Bao Yuliang, there is Bao Junfeng and Bao Junlong. These political games and struggles are too complicated, and we don't need to think too much about them. What we need to do is to find a way to defend the Qingshui River and win the next battle. And to do that, we have to achieve 3 goals. First, block the enemy's crossing route. This can be achieved with rockets. Second, reduce the deterrence of the enemy's armored forces. We can achieve this by using a large number of anti-tank missiles, and these anti-tank missiles will arrive soon. Only the third point is the most difficult. We must wipe out the enemy's air force and completely destroy their aircraft. Can't the Vanguard missile do that? Li Bang asked again. I can't. Man-portable air defense missiles pose a great threat to helicopters, but pose very little threat to fixed-wing aircraft, especially modified high-speed propeller aircraft. This is due to the inherent characteristics of the missile. We have no way to make up for its shortcomings. Our previous performance can only be attributed to good luck. They have changed their style of play now and are very cautious in using low-altitude attack tactics, so it is basically impossible for us to catch them. The only role of anti-aircraft missiles is probably to restrict their actions and prevent them from attacking so recklessly. To destroy these planes, we must either shoot them down in an air battle or blow them up on the ground. You mean attack the airport? That's right. Chen Chen nodded seriously and then replied. This is the best tactic we can choose. Infiltrate the rear, find the airport where they landed, and solve the problem once and for all. But first we have to find it, and secondly, we have to be able to get in. Li Bang's brows were furrowed. After all, he was no longer the new recruit who had just picked up a gun and followed Chen Chen to charge into the bandit camp. After fighting one battle after another, his understanding of war and tactics had already reached a higher level. And it was precisely because of this that he understood how fantastic the plan Chen Chen mentioned was. Locating an airport behind enemy lines has never been an easy task. Even in modern times, even with high-resolution satellites and advanced radars, it is extremely difficult to find an airport, not to mention our current technical conditions. Even tracking the direction of an aircraft is a big problem. Looking for an airport? Where would you go? Would you chase after the plane on the ground with your car? Or get the information directly from the north? This is one way, but even so, it is not easy to destroy the airport. After all, the combat radius of the P-51 covers the entire Pubei area. If they set up the airport further north than Myakina, the Dongfeng Corps would be deep behind enemy lines if they wanted to attack. Looking at Li Bang's expression, Chen Chen said, it's not difficult to find the airport. Someone will give us the approximate location where the aircraft's radar signal disappeared. In fact, I've already got this position near Magong. The difficulty lies in how to reach Magong and how to destroy it with sufficient firepower. Time is running out. We must complete the strike while all the planes are at the airport. No one can escape. I have called the helicopter. We will fly to Mogong in 2 hours. Advertisement. Qingshui River is now in your hands. When I come back, our counterattack will begin. Clear. Li Bang nodded solemnly, then turned and walked towards the command room that belonged to him. At the same time, in the catching command post, Valens had completely lost control of his emotions. But on the other hand, the catching commander, Kishou, looked very happy. Watching Valens, who was losing his temper in the command room, slamming the table and cursing, he remained calm as a commander should be. Only after Valens finally calmed down did he finally speak. Mr. Valens, I don't think you need to be so angry. We didn't lose the battle. It wasn't a big win, of course, but it was definitely a victory with some twists and turns. We have already captured the Huli position and established a river crossing point here. In the next round of attack, we can easily send our soldiers to the south bank of the Qingshui River and then launch an attack on the Allied forces from the flank. In fact, this situation is already the final outcome. There's no way they could have continued to hold on anyway. In 2 days, or at most 3 days, we will be able to capture Qingshui River and completely open up the way for large troops to attack Shan State and Hua State. We can fight the next battle even without heavy equipment and aircraft. You know, our casualties are less than 400, while the enemy's casualties and reductions are said to have reached more than 3,000. They only have a few hundred men left. It's just a matter of charging to defeat them. Mr. Valens, isn't this enough to satisfy you? Satisfied? Hearing Kishou's words, Valens' anger, which had just subsided, instantly surged up again. At this moment, he really had the urge to chop Kishou to pieces. You actually call this a victory? With your equipment, numbers, and even air superiority completely crushed, you failed to capture the enemy's position in 2 consecutive attacks. Not only did you lose hundreds of people, but you also lost several key equipment. How can you call this a victory? The other side is just the Allied forces. At the beginning of the battle, they didn't even have many heavy weapons. If you beat the Allied forces like this, how will you fight against the main force of the coalition forces and the Hua State army in the future? Valens had 1,000 words in his heart to say to Kashou's mother, but in the end, all the words came down to one sentence. If we still cannot capture Qingshui River in the next offensive, we will ask for a change of commander. Hearing his words, Kishou shrugged in a very Western way and replied, if we still can't take Qingshui River in the next attack, then we may have to think carefully about whose fault it is. What do you mean? Valens' eyes instantly became sharp, while Kishou waved his hand and said, I don't mean anything. I just want to say that if the North intervenes, we will never win. You should at least be prepared for this. Don't worry, they won't interfere. Valens walked away, cursing Kishou countless times in his heart. But after calming down again, he had to continue dealing with the more difficult matters at hand. Devru has returned, and they are now waiting at their residence. From their mouths, Valens learned of the heavy blow they had suffered in the jungle. This was undoubtedly a tragedy, not only because of the reduction in the number of SEAL Team 6, but more importantly, the first close cooperation between the CIA and the military in Asia resulted in such a result. After opening the door, the 5 fully armed SEALs in the living room all stood up. Valens looked at them in bewilderment for a long time before finally asking, "What's going on?" Hearing his words, a man who looked like a captain spoke up. "The other party is not an ordinary mercenary group. They are even more professional than described in the intelligence we received earlier. They eliminated the false targets and went straight to us, then killed one of our patrol members before we found them. After that, they directed the artillery fire to attack the artillery reconnaissance position, and our artillery reconnaissance radar was destroyed. We wanted to keep them all, and in fact we almost did. But they fought back very firmly and very quickly. They have sharp perception, high shooting accuracy, and a strong spirit of adventure. Although there are some flaws in coordination, they use firepower to smooth out those flaws. In short, we suffered heavy losses. We lost 5 brothers. Their bodies have turned to ashes in the fire." "Understood." Valens nodded heavily, and then continued to ask, "Why did the fight turn out like this? With your equipment, you should have no opponents in the jungle." "We thought so at first, but they're weird." The captain frowned and thought for a moment before continuing. "We checked their bodies. They were using the latest thermal fusion night vision goggles, which are ours. There's nothing strange about that. But the strange thing is they know our tactics very well. What I mean is that they discovered our intentions right away. They didn't even give us a chance to adjust our tactics. Instead, they quickly created chaos and forced us to fight them on the same level. I suspect that some of them may have had close contact with us. They know everything about us. It's like they're our natural enemies. I have to know where they come from. I have to know why they can do this. Try to find some clues, and then maybe we don't need any more clues." Valens shook his head and interrupted him, then said, "If this is what you were wondering, then I think I can give you the answer now." "What's the answer?" the captain asked impatiently. "It's very simple. You are the Blues. I guess today's battle, a battle that took place under a complete disadvantage in equipment and intelligence, may have happened countless times on the training ground for them. The flight route is too risky. Flying along the border, with an average altitude of more than 3,000 meters, this is about the performance limit of the Me-171SH. We have to be fast. The flight is nearly 400 kilometers long. Basically, we won't have a chance to return after we reach the destination. The remaining 200 kilometers of flight are not enough to complete the evacuation. Rather than giving up halfway, it is better to attack directly. We can choose an opportunity to land and hide near Magong. After we determine the location of the enemy airport, we can take off according to your instructions and launch an airstrike on the airport. The helicopter's firepower is still quite sufficient. It will have no problem defeating a few fighter planes on the ground." In the cockpit of the Me-171, the main pilot Chen Lei shouted at Chen Chen in the back. After hearing his plan, Chen Chen almost subconsciously shook his head to refuse. "Impossible, this plan is too risky. We got this helicopter with great difficulty. Your crew is even more valuable. It would be too reckless to directly participate in the air assault behind the enemy lines. I need you to play a greater role in the future. But this could be our one chance to make the most of it." Chen Lei ignored Chen Chen's rebuttal and continued. "There's no need to argue too much. We can choose a compromise solution. We will keep the combat window open. We will hide near Magong and attack if there is an opportunity. If there is no opportunity, we can help you evacuate on our own. There's no need to give up combat opportunities for a little bit of safety, right? That no problem. Take cover near Magong, but you're on your own." Chen Chen finally compromised. Although this plan was completely different from what he said in the combat briefing before takeoff, there was no doubt that this would be the option with the greatest benefits if the crew members were willing to take the risk. The reason why he did not make such arrangements before was not essentially fear of sacrifice, but because he took into account the special nature of Chen Lei's crew. To put it bluntly, they are not from the Dongfeng Corps, but from a third-party outsourcing company in the north. In many missions, Chen Chen could command them without any scruples, but in a life-threatening assault mission behind enemy lines like this one, Chen Chen really couldn't use them as consumables. It's not because of giving face to the north or the lives of people in the north are more valuable, but because if this thing is really fought to the end, you don't know how long it will take to find new personnel to replenish it. In essence, this is still a question of balancing interests. It is at a very delicate balance point, prompting Chen Chen to make a more conservative decision. But what if it is the crew's own request? Chen Lei's attitude obviously relieved Chen Chen's psychological burden, and when he heard the cheers of Chen Lei and other crew members in the headphones, Chen Chen finally realized something. The rabbit in the north is not a real rabbit. The warlike gene always flows in their blood. The doctrine of the mean is actually a lie in a certain sense. As long as there is a chance, they will never refuse to fight or refuse to expand their territory. This is probably the real fighting nation. They don't fight meaningless battles, but if they clearly know what they are doing, their blood will immediately boil. I should give them this opportunity, and I have to give them this opportunity. At this time, the helicopter had climbed up one mountain after another. Through the open cabin door, Chen Chen looked to the right. What came into his eyes was a scenery that was extremely familiar to him. Right at his feet, on one side were Pubei and Kachin, and on the other side were Yunnan and Nujiang River. Completely different from what Chen Lei said, the flight route is too risky. The plane flew fast and steadily, shuttling across the plateau as if it were just strolling in the garden. Behind the snow-capped mountains in the distance hangs a crescent moon that is about to fall. Under the deep blue night sky, this beautiful scene is heart-stirring. Chen Chen retracted his gaze and couldn't help but ask Chen Lei, "Have you flown this route before?" "Of course I." Chen Lei subconsciously wanted to answer, but in the end he took his words back and warned, "Try not to look to the right. We're so close to the border now, it's best not to get ourselves into trouble." "Clear." Chen Chen nodded subconsciously, and then couldn't help but look outside the cabin again. He saw many tiny dots of lights along the desolate and silent border. Those lights cannot be said to be like fireflies in the dark night. Viewed from the air, they're just like a flickering candle in the lonely universe. It seems so fragile and so tiny, as if a gentle breeze from the snowy mountains would be enough to extinguish it completely, but it never extinguished. Chen Chen knew that these candles had been lit on the border for decades, and they would continue to flicker here for countless days and nights. If one day these candles disappear, the only reason may be that they have moved further west. Thinking of this, Chen Chen couldn't help but feel a surge of sadness in his heart. It's not because of regret, but because of gratitude. After crossing the last mountain, the helicopter's altitude dropped rapidly. Then, along a narrow valley, the Mi-171sh turned and maneuvered westward, 100 kilometers away from the target, arriving in 15 minutes. Get your equipment ready. We will land in the basin at position X36200, Y27300, 21 kilometers from the main city of Magon. I will wait here for 6 hours. If we do not receive any further instructions after 6 hours, we will return and leave. Get your equipment ready, brothers, and wait for your good news. Understood. Prepare your equipment. At the command, Chen Chen's team members immediately began to conduct a final check of the equipment they carried with them. Chen Chen still carried the 416 Hong Kong dollars that he was already familiar with, but in addition to the 416 Hong Kong dollars, he did not carry any other firearms. Instead, he carried a Vanguard 2 missile launcher. Similarly, Yang Shu had nothing on him except in 17 Malawian kwaches, but he was carrying 2 missiles. In general, except for the sniper, every member of this team has at least half of the barrel. The firepower has been pulled to the limit of what they can pull under the load. The 10-man team has a total of 12 missiles. They're going to rely on these to destroy all the fighters that may be parked at the airport. 5 minutes later, all the equipment was ready and everyone was ready. 15 minutes later, the helicopter landed silently in the basin and everyone quickly jumped off the plane. The reconnaissance team, led by Yang Shu, immediately climbed to the high ground to establish a guard, while the rest of the personnel dispersed to search, eliminating all possible risks of exposure. The place where they landed was between mountains and forests. The dense jungle covered an area of 3 kilometers around it. Theoretically, as long as they were not discovered by the air defense radar, their whereabouts would never be exposed. But at the same time, in the pursuit of secrecy, they will inevitably have to go through a more difficult journey if they want to reach their destination. A 3-kilometer jungle obstacle course, followed by a forced march of nearly 20 kilometers. Chen Chen did not intend to walk over there. After crossing the jungle, the first thing they had to do was to find a means of transportation. So, after spending more than 2 hours walking out of the jungle, in the darkest moment before the dawn of Pubei, the Dongfeng Corps arrived at their destination. Taiping Village, a small village on the Mengong River. Crawling in the woods 200 meters away from the village, Chen Chen had a panoramic view of the situation in the village. He has marked out 6 armed men, which are the entire armed force of Taiping Village. It's a bit troublesome. The Kachin Army has set up a public security management department here. It's amazing that there is a police station in such a small village. This means that this village is not disconnected from Kachin. If we were to get a boat here and continue north to Mogaung, our whereabouts would likely be exposed. We must make sure we are not discovered. How many residents are there in the village? As soon as Chen Chen finished speaking, Yang Shu's reply came over the radio. Based on the number of buildings, there will be no more than 50 people. Advertisement. Why would they deploy personnel here? This is unreasonable. Reasonable. Chen Chen interrupted Yang Shu and explained. Their assault boats pass through here. This place served as a temporary supply station and has not yet been completely withdrawn. Look at the open space in the village. There are still obvious traces of large machinery left. They have removed the supply station and probably changed the main channel to the Irrawaddy River. The good news is that we can just go straight in, and as long as there are no survivors, we will basically not be discovered in a short time. And there is indeed a boat here. We don't have to look any further. The bad news is there are civilians in the village. We have to find a way to silence them. After Chen Chen finished speaking, the radio fell into silence. As for making civilians shut up, the Dongfeng Corps is actually not very good at it. That is what the US military in Iraq does most. The Dongfeng Corps could certainly learn from their style, but there was no doubt that Chen Chen would never do so. So, after a brief hesitation, Chen Chen gave the order. Get rid of the defenders in the village first, then leave 2 people to guard the villagers, and the rest of you continue to move forward. Clear. The order was quickly confirmed, and then everyone took action. Chen Chen's crosshairs locked onto the enemy closest to him, while the enemies in the distance were left to Yang Shu, who was holding in 17 Malawian kwaches, and another sniper to deal with. Assault team approaching, prepare to enter. Understood. Prepare to enter. The 4 team members approached the village using a standard stealth approach. When they arrived at the designated position, their low voices of reports came over the radio. At this time, 2 team members were standing outside the wall of the temporary barracks of the defenders, and a sentry with a rifle was only separated from them by a wall. The lights in the barracks had been turned off long ago, and the people inside didn't know that they were about to face a fatal disaster. Action countdown, 3, 2, 1, start. Chen Chen gave the order in a low voice. And then there was a crisp mechanical collision sound and a somewhat distorted gunpowder explosion sound like firecrackers. The 6 enemies who had been locked fell on the spot. At this distance, with the blessing of modern sights, all the enemies were shot in the head and killed with 1 shot. At the same time, the assault team had begun to attack the barracks. In order to avoid waking up the villagers, they did not use stun grenades, but kicked open the door and quickly broke in. The sound of gunfire and flames overflowed from the windows of the barracks, accompanied by a few shouts and curses, and the entire Taiping village returned to peace. But Chen Chen, who was still on the commanding heights outside the village, saw that lights had been turned on in several houses in Taiping village. 2 houses on the south side of the village road. Quickly take control. There are 3 houses at the center of the pagoda. Assault team, go there. Search quickly. Don't give them a chance to report the news. Clear. All members of the team had abandoned their original positions and started running towards the village. 30 seconds later, the nearest assault team had taken control of 3 houses near the pagoda. On the south side of the village road, the owner of the house had just opened the door sleepily when the cold muzzle of a gun was already pointed at his head. "Don't move," Chen Chen said in English. I know. The man answered in panic, but Chen Chen was subconsciously stunned. English? At this time, the lower half of his face was covered by a mask, and the night vision goggles on his head covered his eyes. Not an inch of his skin was exposed, and the residents had no way of judging his identity from his skin color. This gave Chen an unexpected surprise. Obviously, these people mistook him for an American. After all, in their opinion, only the American team was worthy of such sophisticated equipment. This also resulted in the person who was pointed at by the gun to be surprisingly cooperative. It took less than 2 minutes to control all the awakened civilians in the village. 20 minutes later, the whole village was awakened, and all the villagers were gathered together and tied up tightly with ropes. "I'll leave this to you. We'll go to Magong now." "Clear." The 2 team members who were left behind answered solemnly, and then Chen Chen led the team to the river, where they found their target. A fishing boat equipped with a diesel engine. It was already 7 o'clock in the morning, and there was no time to waste. After checking the fishing boat's fuel tank and moving a barrel of diesel onto the boat, Chen Chen started the fishing boat and led the team north along the river. According to the plan, they will change transportation near Nam Antai and continue to Mogong by land. Afterwards, they will conduct an infiltration reconnaissance on Mogong and launch an assault after determining the exact location of the airport. All this will be completed within 2 hours, and at this time, they are only 20 kilometers away from the target location. At the same time, in the northern suburbs of Mogong, at the temporary airport, looking at the 4 remaining fighter planes on the runway, an Asian-looking soldier asked the white man in front of him, "Are you sure they will come? Are you sure they can get in? I mean, this is in the heart of Kachin. Isn't it too hasty to start moving now?" "Not rushed at all." The white man shook his head and replied, "This is the most cautious strategy. You never know what they can do. Tell your people to prepare the airport. They can't stop the infiltration of the Dongfang Corps. Maybe you can kill all their infiltrators, but they will definitely blow up all our planes." "Okay, now tell me, how long will it take for the new airport to be ready?" 3 hours, 3 hours at most." "That's 3 hours. It must be quick." After arriving at Nam Antai, we disembarked, changed to a truck, took off our equipment, and went out for reconnaissance in plain clothes. We discovered the location of the airport and confirmed the presence of fighter jets. The series of actions went smoothly, and the Dongfeng Corps completed them all in less than 2 hours. This was due to the amazing horsepower of the small fishing boat, and of course, Chen Chen's precise insight. In fact, preliminary reconnaissance activities had already begun when they had just entered Nam Antai and were 5 kilometers away from Mogong. Although they did not speak the local language, they were able to determine from their conversations with the shop owner that there were frequent aircraft activities around Mogong, and based on the direction in which the aircraft flew, they were able to roughly define the scope of the airport. Therefore, after arriving at Mogong, they did not waste almost a minute. Instead, they drove the covered truck stolen from the mine straight to the designated direction. Before approaching the airport and entering the security area, they got off the truck and went into the jungle to set up an observation post from a high place. At this moment, what appeared in front of Chen Chen was an extremely simple airport. There are only 2 unpaved runways and 6 hangars built with colored steel. The lights used to guide takeoffs and landings are obviously temporarily installed, and some are just ordinary street lights. Not to mention ground staff, support, and machinery. These things certainly exist, but they just exist. If Chen Chen had not been mentally prepared, it would be hard for him to imagine that a propeller fighter capable of controlling the entire Pubei battle situation could fly out of such an airport. But from another perspective, this seems to be the normal situation. After all, there is a huge functional gap between wartime airports and regular airports. The latter require ensuring the aircraft's continuous combat capability, maintenance capability, and overhaul capability, but the former only requires one thing: to enable the aircraft to fly and be able to fight. It has to be said that the American sensitivity to war is really not something that can be manipulated by some unconventional means. If it were Deng who was in charge of this matter, they would probably have to first send in excavators to open up an airport where people could have afternoon tea, and then allow the plane to go on the runway for testing. By the time they are ready, it will be too late to fight, let alone fight. On the contrary, the American idea of use it when it comes and replace it if it doesn't work is most suitable for the situation in Pubei. There are experts at the airport. Chen Chen moved the telescope away and then said, "The distance is 2.4 kilometers, which is completely within the detection range of the Vanguard 2 Seeker. But the problem is that the aircraft has almost no infrared signal when it is not in operation, so it is almost impossible to hit it. We need to wait until they start it before we do anything. We are facing the takeoff runway. At low speed and low altitude, it is not difficult to hit accurately. Now just wait, the Qingshui River attack will start soon. This time they should all be out. Our chance will come soon." Clear. All members of the team responded in turn, quickly found their positions, and entered a hidden state. After everything was ready, Lenny stared at the runway at the foot of the mountain and said with a little emotion, "I should have brought some bazookas, recoilless rifles, or mortars. At this distance, the missile seems to be of little use." Hearing his words, Chen Chen shook his head helplessly and explained, "The maximum range of a single-soldier rocket is only about 400 meters at most, and a recoilless gun can reach 1,500 meters, but to reach 3,000 meters, you have to use a rocket-assisted extended-range projectile. We can barely reach the 60-degree mortar, but at this distance, it is difficult to guarantee accuracy. If we miss the first shot and expose our position, it will be difficult for us to launch a new attack. Don't forget, they have anti-artillery radar. How could they not have any preparation for such an important place as the airport? Advertisement. Unless we force a 120-ton vehicle over here, how to transport it here is a huge problem." After Chen Chen finished speaking, Lenny nodded thoughtfully. He originally thought that Chen Chen had not considered carefully enough in the equipment configuration this time, but now it seems that he was the one who had not considered carefully enough. After eliminating all impossible factors, using man-portable air defense missiles to intercept during the takeoff phase is indeed the only option, and it is also the safest and most stable option. The battlefield is ever-changing, and victory or defeat is indeed made up of small details. He silently memorized this lesson in his heart, and at this moment in the distant airport, the unexpected change of the Dongfeng Corps suddenly occurred. Two large trucks drove into the airport. Ground staff quickly stepped forward to meet them. Then, after the truck stopped, everyone began to move things onto the ground one box at a time. At this distance, he couldn't see clearly what those people were carrying, so he turned to Chen Chen and asked, "Captain, what are they doing?" Chen Chen frowned and shook his head. He had no answer in his mind at this moment. Maybe just normal supplies? I don't know. I can't see anything unusual from their actions. Let's observe them for a while. Clear. Lenny didn't ask any more questions, and soon after, the airport ground staff had opened the box. As the items inside were distributed one by one to the soldiers stationed at the airport, the confusion on Chen Chen's face became more and more serious. The things in their hands looked like grenades. But the question is, what kind of strategy is it to send grenades to the airport garrison at this time? Chen Chen really want to call them and ask them what they were doing? Did they think that someone would organize a large-scale light infantry attack on the airport, and that they needed to use rifle grenades to strengthen the defense? Isn't this too outrageous? However, within 2 minutes, Chen Chen's question was answered. As a special M2 armored vehicle drove into the airport, Chen Chen could tell at a glance what made the two armored vehicles different. It is a support armored vehicle. Not only does its turret have a smoke launcher, but it also has two 73mm flare launchers. What is a flare? If it is in the air, it is a heat-attracting flare. At this moment, Chen Chen almost felt a tingling sensation on his scalp, because he knew that his actions had been guessed. The enemy might not know that they were already eyeing them covetously from the hillside, but they must have predicted that the Dongfeng Corps might launch an attack on the airport. Those boxes did not contain grenades, but flares fired from grenade launchers. Their planes were about to perform a transfer maneuver, and before taking off, they had to use heat-seeking bombs to set up a decoy wall to prevent possible sneak attacks from portable air defense missiles. Being so cautious, they really had planned everything out. Call a helicopter. Chen Chen spoke decisively, and then continued. They have no flaws. It's time to play for your life. Calling a helicopter to attack directly is the option Chen Chen least wants to use. As he said before, the risk is too high and the expected loss is too great. This airport is the core of the Ga Yaozi army. The subsequent series of strategic deployments are all based on this airport and the aircraft in the airport. So, if you say that there is no complete defense system here, that is absolutely impossible. It would be fine if they could launch a sneak attack with a small number of highly concealed light weapons. But once large equipment such as helicopters enter the scene, the two sides will inevitably engage in a fight to the death. The Dongfeng Corps' goal is to destroy all fixed-wing fighters, and the Ga Yaozi Corps' goal is to destroy helicopters. The combat objectives of both sides seem to be counterpart, but in fact, judging from the results, no matter whether the Dongfeng Corps can achieve its goal or not, it will be difficult for this helicopter to escape unscathed. This operation was truly life-threatening, but Cheng Lei accepted the order without any hesitation. Prepare for takeoff. Arrive at the scheduled attack position in 10 minutes. Please be ready. Understood. We will launch a synchronized attack from the ground. Chen Chen answered in a slightly serious tone, and then he immediately deployed the forces at hand. 8 people were divided into 3 groups. Group 1 was responsible for reconnaissance and long-range fire support, using light machine guns and sniper rifles to suppress the airport's firepower point at a distance of 800 meters. 2 groups of 3 people are responsible for operating portable air defense missiles, finding suitable shooting positions, and attacking enemy ground units. 3 assault teams are responsible for feinting and harassing, creating opportunities for the helicopters to attack, etc. Use Vanguard. 2 to attack ground units. Before Chen Chen finished speaking, someone in the team couldn't help but interrupt him. Looking at the other person's confused eyes, Chen Chen said, "Yes, it is used to attack ground units." In theory, the infrared detection system of the Vanguard 2 is fully capable of locking onto the heat source of ground vehicles within a range of about 1 kilometer. The only problem is that you must find the right elevation angle. There's a depression in front of the airport. It should be able to reach an elevation angle of 10 degrees. At that location, we can find a way to destroy their M2 or other ground vehicles. Is that okay? No problem. After hearing Chen Chen's explanation, the team members nodded immediately and did not raise any more questions. He had obviously never heard of such a thing, but he was only subconsciously puzzled about Chen Chen's decision, without the slightest doubt. The reason why Chen Chen was able to come up with this plan was actually due to his experience in his previous life. In his impression, there has always been a question in the field of portable missiles. That is, can the Javelin be used to shoot down airplanes and the Stinger be used to shoot down tanks? This problem was not solved for a long time until the real war broke out, when both missiles proved their value with real combat examples. The Javelin can hit planes, and the Stinger can hit tanks. Although on the surface, the infrared guidance method has very high requirements for the intensity of the heat source, this is not a problem if the distance is close enough. If it can't lock onto something at a distance of 6 kilometers, can it also not lock onto something at a distance of 800 meters? The only problem is that the air defense missiles do not have armor-piercing capabilities and their lethality against ground armor is limited. But at this time, Chen Chen was not pursuing a one-shot kill. Even if he couldn't destroy the M2, it would still be no problem to hit the truck. The plan was made, and everyone started to act immediately. At this time, there were still 8 minutes before the helicopter arrived at the designated combat position. Everyone jumped out of the jungle and approached the airport as quickly as possible. With the help of the trucks left on the roadside, the Dongfeng Corps assault team quickly closed the distance. But just as they were about to reach the scheduled combat position, a convoy drove towards them. That IT was the Ga Yaozi army. To be precise, it was the mobile force of the Kachin Army's airport garrison. This convoy has a total of 8 vehicles and more than 100 people, and the direction they are heading is the direction from which the Dongfeng Corps came. Sure enough, there is an expert in the airport. They have discovered the weakness of the airport and are preparing to send people to clear the jungle heights where anti-aircraft missiles are most likely to be launched. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer, and the atmosphere was tense. At this time, they were still some distance away from the actual security zone of the airport, but there was no doubt that they could not drive past it under the other party's nose. We must strike first, even if it means exposing our offensive actions. This convoy must be eliminated. Prepare for battle. Chen Chen gave an order in a low voice, and then the truck carrying the Dongfeng Corps braked suddenly and stopped on the side of the road. The Kachin convoy continued to move forward, but its speed had slowed down. And as is common with teams without any experience in mobile warfare, they made a fatal mistake. They wanted to confirm the identity of the Eastern Corps' truck, but they did not send out a lead vehicle to conduct inspection and reconnaissance. Instead, the entire convoy drove over and stopped less than 20 meters away from the truck. 2 men who looked like officers got out of the lead jeep, but Chen Chen did not give them a chance to get close. Get off! After a short command, 6 big men in the back of the truck jumped out of the vehicle almost at the same time. Immediately afterwards, the combat formation was quickly deployed. They did not try to find any cover. 2 machine guns opened fire at the same time. In less than 3 seconds, the lead vehicle and the officer standing next to the vehicle were shot to pieces. Immediately afterwards, the remaining 4 team members quickly moved to the flanks, also firing at full speed and in the same covering manner. The first 4 cars had no time to react, and within just 30 seconds, all the people in the cars were wiped out. And 30 seconds later, they finally organized a counterattack. But at this time, Chen Chen and Lin He, with the help of other team members' cover, had already occupied the high point on the left side of the road. A series of small firecrackers fell, and 2 more cars were cleared. There were less than 20 people left in the last 2 trucks, but at this moment they no longer had any will to resist. Reload! Keep moving forward! 2 smoke bombs were fired, and the road behind the convoy was completely blocked. The remaining Kachin soldiers directly laid down their weapons and tried to surrender, but Chen Chen did not give them any chance. Is this the time to take prisoners? Obviously not. The only response to the enemy's shouts was more intense gunfire. 2 minutes later, the entire convoy was completely cleared. In these 2 minutes, the Dongfeng Corps fired more than 1,500 rounds of bullets. Each machine gunner emptied at least 2 magazines, and the grenades were consumed by more than half. But it's all worth it, because this enemy convoy was completely unable to organize any effective counterattack from the beginning to the end. Operation continues. The reconnaissance team occupies the advantageous terrain. The assault team organizes equipment on the spot, and the support team continues to move to the depression to find an advantageous position. Advertisement Chen gave a loud order, and the 8-member team immediately split into 3 groups and rushed to their respective designated battle positions. At this time, the support team was still 400 meters away from the depression, and it would take them at least 2 minutes to arrive. What the assault team led by Chen Chen has to do is to buy these 2 minutes for them. According to the original plan, they should have quietly approached the airport checkpoint and then launched a harassment attack, but judging from the current situation, it is too late. Chen Chen's eyes quickly swept across the lifeless convoy, trying to find useful equipment. And this convoy did not disappoint him, because on the back of a truck, he found a piece of equipment that could almost play a decisive role in this battle. Zu 23 bis 2, twin 23mm anti-aircraft guns. Chen Chen guessed the intentions of some commanders of the other side's airport. Obviously, he wanted to send this anti-aircraft gun to the commanding heights of the jungle to guard against possible attacks from helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft of the Dongfeng Corps. But he never expected that the Dongfeng Corps could be so fast that they had intercepted this delicious dish before they had even completed their deployment. Chen Chen was overjoyed. He knew that this truck and this anti-aircraft gun could not be easily destroyed by a few machine gun bullets. If they could block the direction of the airport, they would not even need the support of helicopters to destroy all targets in the airport. Use anti-aircraft guns. Chen Chen shouted loudly. Then, he jumped onto the truck first, released the pin, adjusted the steering gear, and aimed at the airport. With just a slight pull of the trigger, most of the targets in the airport would be reduced to ashes. But at this moment, Lin He, who was standing behind him, suddenly attacked. He grabbed Chen Chen's bulletproof vest and dragged him several meters away, then rolled and crawled under the roadbed. Then, a huge explosion sounded, and when Chen Chen looked back, the anti-aircraft gun had been completely destroyed. This was not the work of M2. Damn, you guys also have Tau. Chen Chen looked towards the airport with lingering fear, and at this time, the opponent's M2 had already set up the machine gun and started suppressing fire on the road where the convoy was located. Hide! Hide! The 3 members of the support team were still 200 meters away from the depression. Their position was not exposed, and they were not ambushed, but they were moving too slowly. Each person was carrying at least 40 kilograms of weight, and after the forced march through the jungle, everyone's physical strength had been exhausted to the limit. For a moment, the 3 members of the assault team, whose position was exposed, and even the 2 members of the reconnaissance team were put in a passive position. The enemy was recklessly suppressing the enemy with bullets. The bullets from the heavy machine guns were flying everywhere on the road. The mortar shells began to fall with a whistle. The large caliber machine guns made a big hole with every shot. It was a joke to rely on a few people to attack the airport. It was normal to be suppressed. If you could really suppress the enemy, it would be a legend. Chen Chen didn't have any chance to shoot. Under the current circumstances, if he dared to show his head, there would be only one result: being shot to pieces. Keep hidden, retreat to the jungle. Don't fight back. Don't fight back. He continued to issue orders. The enemy's firepower became more intense, and the second mobile group from the airport began to approach the location of the convoy. It would only take them 5 minutes at most to drive in front of Chen Chen, and then rely on long-range firepower to calmly search them out and shoot them down one by one. The situation was extremely urgent, but Chen Chen was no longer nervous. because he knew that most of the opponent's firepower and attention had been attracted. This was the best fighter for the Mi-171sh. Although there were still 3 minutes left before the agreed attack time, with Cheng Lei's experience, he would definitely not miss such an opportunity. The fact was just as he expected. 30 seconds later, a dark green shadow rose from the top of the mountain behind Chen Chen. Along with this shadow, there appeared a burst of explosive flames. The rockets in the honeycomb rushed straight towards the airport, causing a series of dense explosions and dust on the ground. The first to bear the brunt of the attack were the M2 armored vehicles, which had a top attack firepower that even tanks could not withstand, and attacking lightly armored units was like tearing paper. The flames and explosions from the detonation silenced the entire airport, and then the Mi-171 disappeared back under the mountain. Without a single shot attack, the helicopter was like a nimble assassin. It delivered a fatal blow above the treetops and then quickly escaped, constantly maneuvering to find the next opportunity to strike. Under its cover, the support group finally reached the designated combat position and obtained the elevation angle required for launching. They did not lose their target because within these 2 minutes, the P-51 that came out of the hangar had already started taxiing. In an emergency, this thing can take off with a minimum distance of 450 meters. The corresponding gliding time is 20 seconds. Jerk off! Jerk off! Chen Chen shouted loudly. The missile has locked onto the position of P-51, but at the same time, all the heat-seeking missiles that had been prepared at the airport have also been launched. Dozens of flares tilted into the air, forming a fire net in front of the P-51 and the anti-aircraft missiles. 2 Vanguard 2s were fired at the P-51, but lost their target and exploded in the fire net. In just a moment, the P-51 suddenly pulled up, almost lifting up to a 60-degree angle, and then dived quickly, achieving an extremely high ground-grazing speed. No air defense missile can lock onto an object at such a close distance and at such a fast speed, because the operator's eyes can hardly keep up with the speed of the plane flying. We have to retreat. As long as one plane took off, the Dongfeng Corps' assault plan would fail, because they could not continue to charge forward when the enemy had air superiority. However, the battlefield situation often changed in that instant. When the P-51 completed its turn and continued to rise, the 2 Vanguard 2s fired in the second round actually crossed the fire net and caught up with the P-51, which was still maneuvering at high speed. The explosion sounded, and at this moment probability theory came into play. The 70% anti-interference rate of the Vanguard 2 air defense missile brought amazing results. The P-51's wing was damaged, and it tilted and crashed into the middle of the runway. Flames and wreckage covered 2 entire runways, and the takeoff conditions for other aircraft had become extremely harsh. Now, without Chen Chen's order, the Mi-171sh appeared in the air again, ready to attack. But almost at the same time, another helicopter appeared in the sky not far away. That is also a Mi-171sh. Rockets 2. Attack the helicopters. Prioritize the helicopters. Chen Chen issued new instructions as soon as he saw the enemy helicopter, but it was obvious that the other party did exactly the same thing as they did. 4 Kachin air defense soldiers carrying portable air defense missiles appeared at the edge of the airport. The Stinger, which had completed assembly of batteries and cooling modules, was aimed in the direction of the Dongfeng Corps helicopter. Chen Chen even had the illusion that he had heard the locking sound, but at a distance of nearly 600 meters, there was very little he could do. The reconnaissance team's 2 large-caliber sniper rifles quickly locked onto the 2 anti-aircraft soldiers, but they only hit one of them. 3 missiles flew out of the chamber, and at the moment of being locked, flames spurted out from the helicopter, and the Angel wings made of heat-seeking missiles instantly spread out, intercepting all the hastily fired missiles behind it. Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief, but on the other side, the 2 Vanguard 2s fired by the Eastern Corps support team were also interfered by the heat-seeking bombs and exploded on the side of the enemy helicopter. At this time, the Dongfeng Corps only had 2 anti-aircraft missiles left, and the heat-seeking bombs on the helicopter had been used up. The situation seemed to have completely turned to the Kachin side. Chen Chen originally thought that the enemy's helicopter would directly confront his own helicopter, but what he didn't expect was that after dodging a round of missile attacks, the Kachin helicopter headed directly for the depression, trying to attack the 2 team members hiding there. It seems that in their perception, that is the target that poses the greatest threat to them. The 2 helicopters passed each other just like that, and within 10 seconds, the Kachin helicopter had flown over the depression. Seeing this, Chen Chen's heart sank suddenly. Finished. No matter how the movies portray it on the real battlefield, there is only one fate for infantrymen caught by helicopters, and that is being blown to pieces. Although in terms of casualties, these were just 2 ordinary team members, but the feeling of clearly foreseeing their death still made Chen Chen frown. Support team, take cover. Firebird, find a way to shoot it down. Throw a smoke bomb. Scout team, fire at the heat-seeking bombs and find a solution. Don't worry, I'll do it. Before Chen Chen finished a series of hurried instructions, Cheng Lei's reply, which was so stable that it was almost without any fluctuations, came from his headphones. Then, a scene that Chen Chen couldn't believe appeared. The Mi-171sh, which was originally maneuvering almost close to the ground, suddenly rose at a large angle of more than 60 degrees after flying over the airport at high speed. Then within 2 seconds, it turned its nose on the edge of stall and dived rapidly, with its nose already pointing in the direction of another Mi-171. Levisman flips. This thing, like the Cobra maneuver of a fighter jet, has always been considered a flashy flying maneuver. But when placed here, Chen Chen couldn't find any fault with it at all, maintaining a low altitude and high speed to pass quickly, avoiding the aiming of anti-aircraft fire from the ground. After squeezing the performance to the limit, it quickly pulled up and quickly occupied the high and low position advantage, completing a U-turn within 2 seconds, accurately pointing to the direction of attack. Every action is useful, and every action is completed with great efficiency and accuracy. Moreover, the pilot who completed this series of actions was sitting on a medium-sized helicopter from the last century. You know, the Levisman flip is basically a patent of armed helicopters. It has extremely high requirements for the performance of the helicopter engine and the strength of the body. Even if there is a small operating error, the helicopter will really stall in the air and fall down without the enemy hitting it. It is incredible that Cheng Lei can perform this move. But from another perspective, it is not surprising that the monsters in the north did such a thing. You know, Chen Chen had also heard rumors that a senior official of the Northern Air Assault Brigade, who was in his 40s and almost 50, could fly out of Levisman in an ordinary Z9. The time he was reported to have flown out of Levisman in an armed Z-10 was just a performance by the boss on a whim after changing into new equipment. If the boss is like this, it goes without saying that the younger brothers under him are like this. Perhaps for Cheng Lei, this was also a basic operation. But now Chen Chen did not have time to feel too much because just after his helicopter completed the U-turn, almost in the blink of an eye, several rockets flew out of the barrel and hit another helicopter hovering in the air with great accuracy. Chen Chen was stunned. Now he finally understood why the North spent so much effort to train helicopters on the subject of shooting on the move after experiencing an exercise. Because in the real battlefield, the situation is exactly as the Russian pilots said. Once the helicopter enters hovering, it is a real target, and even the Crusaders driving medieval catapults can shoot it down. A violent explosion occurred instantly above the depression. The two members of the support team had just avoided a round of rocket attacks from the enemy helicopter, and then they had to avoid the propeller falling from the sky. Running around is not enough to describe their state. It should be said that they have been running around since the helicopter appeared. Flames fell from the sky, and the rapidly spinning propellers stabbed into the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Chen Chen called out on the radio a little nervously, and finally breathed a sigh of relief after receiving replies from two members of the support team. This stage has been passed, but a new round of airstrikes has also arrived. It is impossible for an airport to have only one anti-aircraft gun, and it is even more impossible to move the only anti-aircraft gun out of the airport. There cannot be only 4 anti-aircraft missiles, and it is even more impossible that they would give up after the failure of the first round of attacks. The situation of the Mi-171sh is still dangerous. According to Chen Chen's idea, Cheng Lei should give priority to air defense firepower like the Kachin army, but Cheng Lei's idea is completely different from Chen Chen's. He ignored the anti-aircraft soldiers on the ground and used the momentum of the dive to quickly descend in altitude, then pulled up suddenly before hitting bottom. He controlled the helicopter's altitude to less than 10 meters from the ground, and then the bulky Mi-171sh began to pull sideways quickly with unparalleled flexibility. No, not just a quick sideways move, but a centripetal turn. This was another move that Chen Chen had only seen in flight performances. It could even be said to be a flashy move. But Cheng Lei used practical actions to tell Chen Chen one thing. That is, as long as a tactical action exists, it must have its meaning. The large-scale turning maneuver made it impossible for the anti-aircraft guns to keep up with the speed of the helicopter, and the infantry carrying missiles were even more at a loss. Just as Chen Chen had personally experienced, launching a Stinger missile was definitely not as simple as most people thought. The system's response time from locking to firing is more than 5 seconds. If the locking is not completed within these 5 seconds, you will most likely have to replace the cooling module and the main battery. What's more, before launching, you have to consider the safe distance, the identification of friend or foe, and the pitch angle. This is definitely not a simple operation that can be done by just pulling the trigger. Thus, a rather funny scene emerged on the serious battlefield. Those anti-aircraft soldiers were so fooled by Cheng Lei that they couldn't even fire. But Cheng Lei was not idle at this time. What was the purpose of the centripetal turn? Was it just to avoid ground fire? Of course not. The reason why it is centripetal is that its nose pointing always maintains basic stability, which can achieve super high efficiency when suppressing ground fire. After only half a circle, the 2 anti-aircraft artillery positions of the Kachin army were completely destroyed by rockets. Immediately afterwards, Cheng Lei operated the helicopter with a light sideways maneuver to change the center of rotation. The next round of rocket launchers hit directly in front of a P-51 that was preparing to take off at the end of the runway. Advertisement: the accuracy is slightly lacking, but it is completely sufficient. Coupled with the continuous suppression of the onboard heavy machine guns, the P-51 was paralyzed on the runway before it could even take off. The entire airport was in fact disabled, and the remaining planes in the hangar had completely become fish on the chopping board. Halfway through the second loop, another hangar was destroyed. The whole process was truly a feast for the eyes. Not only Chen Chen, even the commander of Rixin at the airport was probably stunned. They probably would never have thought that someone could complete a raid on a heavily guarded airport with just a helicopter. Of course, it is undeniable that the Dongfeng Corps' early harassment and feint attack did play a big role. But the most important reason for being able to achieve this point was the complete technical crushing. They are both Mi-171. So why does the Kachin helicopter look so stupid? When someone has something to do, Levisman will turn centripetally. Why can you only hover and shoot? There's no other way. You just have to practice more. But unfortunately, the Kachin pilots probably no longer have the opportunity to practice more. The third loop was almost over. When Chen Chen thought Cheng Lei would pull up with standard moves, he once again performed a trick. After the nose of the helicopter was aligned with the runway, it tilted rapidly to the left, and the propeller almost passed right past the hangar. He used the hangar as a shelter, blocking the frontal anti-aircraft firepower of the airport. And in this tight period of time, he was able to free up his hands and shoot down the last dozen or so rockets in the magazine. Oh! Cheng Lei's cheers came from the radio, and it seemed that victory was at hand. But in fact, the performance of the Mi-171sh has been squeezed to the limit. At the moment before the plane was about to stall, Cheng Lei had no choice but to pull the plane up and maintain the stability of its flying attitude. This action consumed a lot of power, and the Mi-171 finally slowed down, which gave the anti-aircraft infantry an opportunity. In an instant, more than 6 missiles took off into the air. The distance between the helicopter and the ground was less than 200 meters. In Chen Chen's opinion, there was no way Cheng Lei could escape this time. That's true, but there are some differences. 3 missiles missed their targets. 1 missile was avoided by a spiral maneuver, and then when there was no way to avoid it, the entire fuselage was tilted, and 2 missiles were caught with the bottom of the helicopter. This certainly could not avoid the fate of being shot down, but at least he successfully avoided the most vulnerable main rotor, rear rotor, and cockpit, giving the plane a chance to escape. Chen Chen watched helplessly as the Mi-171sh piloted by Cheng Lei began to lose power and fall after escaping the airport. Before that, he had already reached the highest altitude possible. Below the helicopter was the main urban area of Magong, and the ground was extremely hard. If it landed directly on the ground, the helicopter would be destroyed, and the people on board would die. But how could Cheng Lei have no plan for the crash? With the main rotor intact, the helicopter began to spin and fall. Relying on the spin effect, although it has completely lost kinetic energy, the main rotor of the Mi-171sh still maintains an ultra-high rotation speed. At the last moment before touching down, the helicopter suddenly rose in a strange posture. Then, Cheng Lei's voice, even with a bit of excitement, was heard again on the radio. Holy crap, safe landing. Bah! Chen Chen could hear the huge collision sound clearly even from a distance of thousands of meters. Then there was silence on the radio. Retreat and save people, Chen Chen said calmly. At this time, the 2 support team members whose mission had been declared over had abandoned the heavy Vanguard 2 launcher and quickly returned to the road where the first conflict occurred. The reconnaissance team set up large-caliber sniper rifles to block the second mobile force heading from the airport to the conflict point. Immediately afterwards, the assault team also gave up suppressing the direction of the airport and instead quickly prepared vehicles, suppressed the enemy support forces with machine gun fire, and evacuated towards the Magong urban area. They encountered almost no obstruction because Magong itself was not an important town, and the garrison here was not too large, and most of them had been deployed around the airport. The road leading to the city was unobstructed, and it took less than 10 minutes for the Dongfeng Corps to reach the crash site. At this time, they finally encountered the Magong defenders who were waiting for them. The problem is that these people don't know whether they are guarding a wooden stake or a rabbit. The Mi-171sh was designed for soft landings. Although it cannot fly, the 3 heavy machine guns on the door and tail are no joke. With the joint efforts of both inside and outside, the Kachin army was defeated in almost just one encounter. Chen Chen quickly led the team to the crash site, wanting to rescue Cheng Lei. However, Cheng Lei did not seem to need rescue. He set up a heavy machine gun at the hatch and shot down 2 Kachin soldiers who had just appeared across the street. Then he shouted at Chen Chen, come here, get behind me." Chen Chen was stunned and speechless. It was not until he spread the smoke around him and rushed to Cheng Lei that he finally had the chance to ask about Cheng Lei's situation. "You're not hurt at all? How is that possible?" Cheng Lei grinned and shook his head, pointing at his legs and said, "It's broken. I can't walk." Chen Chen looked at his calf, which was almost bent at 30 degrees, and then looked at his face and then said, "Damn, you acted out the most godlike performance in the show. We can't leave. Let's retreat to the residential area first. Pay attention to cover and hide." While supporting Cheng Lei forward, Chen Chen directed the rest of the team to clear the way. At this time, all the Kachin defenders in Magong had rushed to the crash site and had formed an encirclement of the crash site. After eliminating the first group of Kachin troops that arrived, Chen Chen also tried to break out by driving his car directly, but the firepower of the defenders here was completely unmatched by ordinary ethnic armed groups. They not only had heavy machine guns and rocket launchers, but also anti-tank missiles. If a ground vehicle dares to show its head, it will undoubtedly be dead. Therefore, after making a test and being completely suppressed by heavy machine guns, Chen Chen directly gave up the idea of breaking out. Instead, he chose to throw all the smoke bombs, push the Kachin army back into the blind spot, and then quickly escape from the battle, get rid of the pursuit, and hide in the inner part of Magong City. The situation was extremely critical. The most important equipment they could rely on was no longer available. Among the 11 people including the crew, there were 2 injured and unable to move, and the ammunition was almost exhausted. At this point, if the Dongfeng Corps had not still demonstrated amazing combat power after the crash, scaring the Kachin militia so much that they dared not act rashly before the arrival of the main force, the Dongfeng Corps would have been taken down with just one resolute assault and after suffering certain losses. It was because of their retreat that the Dongfeng Corps was given a temporary respite. However, their time is running out. Even if they can hide in residential areas, they cannot escape the large-scale manhunt that is bound to come. How, in this situation, does Chen Chen still expect the other party to play CQB with him? How is this possible? As long as their position is exposed, the Dongfeng Corps will be greeted with artillery shells one after another until the entire hiding place is blown to ashes. This is an extremely desperate reality, and it is also very likely to be the final outcome of the Dongfeng Corps. But even so, Cheng Lei, who was half hanging on Chen Chen, did not look depressed at all but said in a teasing tone, "Damn it, we are not going to stage another Black Hawk down here, are we? I should have told you not to come to rescue me. You had the chance to just retreat. I saw from the sky that their support force has been intercepted, and you have already completed the rendezvous. Just retreat into the jungle. They won't be able to find you anyway. You had to come. Now everyone is surrounded, right?" Hearing his words, Chen Chen rolled his eyes helplessly, took a breath, and continued, "Don't say such useless things. If we don't come to save you, are we going to watch you die here? How can I die? Don't you see my current identity? You kid? What do you think your identity is useful for here?" Chen Chen pulled Cheng Lei's arm up hard, then continued, "You just bombed someone's airport and destroyed 3 planes. In this situation, do you still expect your identity to save you? Don't say you're not active duty. Even if you are, you'll be blown to ashes first. Stop talking nonsense. Can you jump faster? If not, I will have to find a stretcher to carry you. I'm already the fastest." Cheng Lei exhaled heavily, and then said, "Left, enter the yard first. This residential area is large. Don't go too deep. They have another plane that will be taking off soon. We're going to play hide and seek, not tower defense. The most important thing is to hide first. Clear." Chen Chen followed Cheng Lei's lead and made a gesture, Then Lenny led the team into the courtyard he pointed to. After quickly controlling the civilians in the courtyard, all the team members went into the house and hid. In the moment the door closed, Chen Chen also heard the sound of the propeller turning in the air. Just as Chung Lei said, the Kachin side did manage to get the remaining plane into flight in a very short time and began aerial reconnaissance. If our actions had been even 1 minute slower, we would have been exposed by now. Chen Chen glanced at the family of 3 who had been tied up and gagged, and his expression beneath the masks did not change. Advertisement, he went straight to the 3rd floor and looked out through the window. He then discovered that the encirclement of the Kachin army had been completely formed. At the end of the street opposite the house, there was already a machine gun pickup truck guarding there. Would you consider taking off your equipment and running away? Lenny beside him asked tentatively. Seeing that Chen Chen did not answer immediately, he continued. Our weapons and equipment are completely useless. We don't have much ammunition left, and we are completely at a disadvantage in terms of firepower. There is no way we can win in a head-on confrontation. As long as we open fire, even if we can drag a few more enemies into the water, we won't be able to get out alive. We only stand a chance if we abandon our equipment and disguise ourselves as civilians. They have never seen our faces, and there is no way they can recognize us. It sounds risky, but at least I see. Chen Chen interrupted Lin He's judgment, but did not refute it. It has to be said that everyone in the earliest team of the Dongfeng Corps has indeed grown up. Even Lin He, who seemed a little naive before, is now able to infer the seemingly unreasonable but most rational solution based on the battlefield environment. Abandon your equipment and put down your guns? To a soldier, this might be no different from surrender. But the fact is at this time this is indeed the only way out. Chen Chen frowned tightly. He did not make a decision immediately. Instead, he walked down the stairs and said to the team members who had already started to quickly treat their wounds and replenish their water. 2 choices. First, abandon your equipment, disguise yourself as a civilian, and try to get out. Second, we will conduct guerrilla warfare relying on the residential buildings, and try to delay them and wait for support. What support? Chung Lei asked immediately. We have planes too. It will take at most 2 hours, and we will definitely get there. Xiaoyu will also find a way. Hua State still has 2 helicopters. They must take action. Chen Chen replied. But Kachin still has an A-29. This last A-29 is a ground attack aircraft and does not pose much of a threat. But the Kachin will mobilize quickly, and even if the planes come, there may not be conditions for rescue. They're all seaplanes. If they can reach the Mengong River, they can evacuate. The wounded cannot fight guerrilla warfare. So, we must abandon the wounded? Yes, we must abandon the wounded and pick them up before the final evacuation. After a series of quick questions and answers, Chung Lei fell silent again. After a long moment, he said, abandon the wounded and go fight. Put it all together. The wounded abandoned their equipment and disguised themselves as civilians. Don't worry about us. Your gunfire is our cover. Don't worry. We won't die. In this world, as long as it is defined as guerrilla warfare, the core must be the same. The core of its tactics is basically unified. That is, rapid maneuver, rapid transfer, avoiding head-on confrontation, and inflicting maximum damage under the premise of maximum safety. Or to put it in more common terms, it means being able to attack from the side instead of the front, and being able to attack with the back instead of the side, thus bringing out the talent of Lao Lu to the fullest. Although the members of the Dongfeng Corps are all new recruits, the inheritance of guerrilla tactics is engraved in the team's genes, so Chen Chen doesn't even need to make too many arrangements. Everyone has already clearly identified their positions. After hiding the 2 wounded in a place that the enemy would never expect, that is, a garbage pool in a residential area, the remaining 9 members of the team quickly dispersed. Except for Yangshu, who still performed reconnaissance duties and went to the commanding heights, all the others were divided into groups of 2, each moving deep into the residential area, each looking for a favorable combat position, preparing to launch a full-scale guerrilla war against the Kachin army on the opposite side. Their goal was to delay time, not to break through or annihilate the enemy. So in the basic combat plan, Chen Chen also set clear boundaries and conveyed 3 most basic principles to the team members. First, dispersed operations do not mean that each team fights on its own, but rather that they cover and connect with each other on the basis of dispersion, so as to achieve control of the largest area with the least manpower. Second, when ammunition reserves are insufficient, avoid all unnecessary engagements and focus on hiding. The only purpose of fighting is to hide further. Third, never launch a forceful attack when the enemy has sufficient troops. Do not blindly start a war to prevent the reduction of the encirclement. As long as there is room for movement, do not open fire. It has to be said that these 3 principles can be said to be extremely conservative, even cowardly to the extreme. But Chen Chen firmly believed in the correctness of these 3 principles, because he knew that these were serious summaries of real battlefield experience. At that time, a team of the Russian SSO was carrying out reconnaissance and targeted elimination missions on the front line in Aleppo, Syria. However, due to the Syrian army's desertion and the poor cooperation of the Russian aerospace forces, all 16 members of the team were besieged in the city of Aleppo. In the following period, facing the attacks of various mortars, homemade artillery, rockets, and even tanks from the Jain extremist armed forces, the SSO persisted for 2 days and 2 nights without effective air support, and finally waited for the rescue of the Russian Air Assault Brigade and evacuated the battlefield with no casualties. The enemy casualties they caused were less than 30. 30 people were killed in 2 days and 2 nights, which is a pitifully small number. But unlike the exaggerated results boasted by some marketing accounts such as killing hundreds of enemies or annihilating 300 people, this is the real record of SSO. It is this record that reflects their professionalism and strength. Who wouldn't fight a head-on conflict? Even if they don't have the advantage in firepower, they can still kill dozens of people by shooting at each other with their guns, with the military qualities of a special forces unit. But after killing these people, can you still run away? Only those who unswervingly carry out the mission, eliminate all unnecessary interference, and compress their actions to the purest and most extreme degree are true masters. In this time, The Dongfeng Corps will learn from SSO and become a master. I have occupied the top floor of a high-rise apartment with an unobstructed evacuation route and a good view. Enemy troops from the airport are moving towards the residential area from the southwest, and some of the vanguard troops have gathered in the farmland outside the residential area. 2 Mogang urban security police units are maneuvering along the Mogang Highway and have deployed sentry posts at the road junctions. Another enemy force crossed the river from Kuntao Bridge and established a defense line in the northeast direction. They haven't started a large-scale search yet. I'm not high enough. Once they enter the residential area, it will be difficult for me to grasp their location. Yang Shu's report came from a headset. Chen Chen nodded slightly and replied, "Understood. Continue monitoring." At this time, relying on the information provided by Yang Shu, Chen Chen had already established a floor plan of the Mogong residential area in his mind. The entire residential area is bounded by Mogong Highway and Mengong River and is laid out in an isosceles triangle, with the vertex of the triangle in the northeast and the base of the triangle in the southwest facing the airport. The Kachin army deployed 3 forces on the 3 sides of this triangle for blockade. The Mogong Highway is under the responsibility of the Public Security Police Force. The Dibian is under the responsibility of the airport garrison, and the Mengong River is under the responsibility of the urban garrison. There were more than 600 troops in total in 3 directions, and except for the police force, most of the defenders were equipped with heavy weapons. This was already a very unfavorable situation, but then Yang Shu brought even worse news. The search has not officially begun, but a large number of civilians have gathered on the edge of the residential area. They were not trying to leave the dangerous battlefield, but to tip off the Kachin military. We are completely exposed to surveillance. There are nearly 200 buildings of various types in this residential area, and the number of civilians exceeds 1,000. If they plan to evacuate the civilians, we still have a chance. But if they turn all the civilians into spies, we will have very little room to maneuver. Captain, what should we do? After Yang Shu finished speaking, Chen Chen couldn't help but fall into silence. Only then did he suddenly realize that there were some differences between the current Eastern Corps and the SSO at that time. To the Kachin people, the Dongfeng Corps is not a heavenly soldier who saves people from danger, but a foreign invader. They must be hostile to the Dongfeng Corps, and this hostility will eventually turn into an advantage for the Kachin army. What's the use of having a scout like Yang Shu in the Dongfeng Corps? The Kachin side may have thousands of plans to delay for 2 hours, but this plan is probably not going to work because the enemy's search speed will definitely be much faster than Chen Chen expected. What should I do? Chen Chen subconsciously looked in the direction of the airport, and then a light suddenly flashed in his mind. From the beginning of the fighting until now, he has always remembered one thing, that is, there are masters in the Kachin airport. This expert may be a native Kachin officer, or he may be a foreign aide, but in any case, he cannot be at the front line in person, and his headquarters is most likely still in the airport. But now, the airport defense is empty, and most of the defenders have been transferred away. If the Dongfeng Corps can be defeated at this time, the entire disadvantageous situation will be completely reversed. Chen Chen's eyes lit up instantly, and then he said, "The plan has changed. We need to break out. Lenny, come with me. We're going to swim across the river from the southeast corner, enter the jungle, continue south to bypass the Kachin army, and then walk to the airport. Others create chaos in the city to cover our actions. The entire journey from this route to the airport is at least 5 kilometers. We need to travel light and arrive within an hour. Advertisement, remember, no matter what, buy us an hour. This is the key to our survival. Clear." No one questioned Chen Chen's extremely risky plan. After briefly assigning the tasks, Chen Chen immediately set off with Lin He. Their current location is in the southwest corner of the residential area, nearly 800 meters away from the swimming location predicted by Chen Chen. Chen Chen and Lin He took off their extra equipment and threw away their rifles. Each of them only carried an MP5K used by helicopter crew members and ran at high speed through the streets and alleys of the residential area. It took them less than 5 minutes to reach the swimming site. At this time, the defense line established by the airport defenders on the southwest side was less than 200 meters away from them. This is the most dangerous moment. Chen Chen and Lin He must swim across the river under each other's noses without being discovered. If they want to be absolutely sure, they can only swim forward underwater the whole time. But the width of the Mengong River is nearly 100 meters. Even for an Olympic champion, it is impossible to swim to the other side in one breath without taking a breath. However, Chen Chen had already made preparations. He and Lin He had put several stones in their pockets in advance. Together with the weight of the guns and magazines, it was enough for them to sink naturally in the water. At the same time, he kicked and broke a thin water pipe outside a private house, intending to use the pipe as a breathing hole to help them ventilate. Everything was ready, and Chen Chen issued orders to the other team members waiting in the city. A few seconds later, Yang Shu, who was at the commanding height, took the lead. With a violent gunshot, a .50 BMG large-caliber sniper bullet flew out of the barrel and instantly hit the fuel tank of a pickup truck of the Southwest Airport defenders. This bullet triggered a chain reaction because Yang Shu loaded a red-headed armor-piercing incendiary bomb. Flames rose instantly, followed by a violent explosion. Yang Shu was very lucky, and he didn't need to fire a second shot. After firing the shot, he immediately dragged the gun and evacuated downwards. Just a few seconds after he left, the fire from the heavy machine gun had completely covered the rooftop of the small building, and everything on it was reduced to dust. At the same time, other cover team members also began to take action. They did not have enough ammunition, but in previous conflicts, they had managed to seize a small number of enemy grenades. The power of these grenades is not enough to cause sufficient damage, but the sound of the explosion is enough to attract the enemy's attention. Soon, after the Kachin army completed the encirclement, the first round of small-scale conflicts broke out. Taking advantage of the terrain, the covering team quickly knocked down several Kachin soldiers who were surrounded after the ambush, and quickly withdrew before their heavy machine gun fire arrived. They were extremely fast, and each time they were exposed and firing, It would not exceed 5 seconds, but within these 5 seconds, at least 1 or 2 enemies would fall. The intensity of the conflict was instantly raised, and the Kachin army began to advance into the city. They didn't care about the safety of civilians in the city at all. They just used machine gun fire to sweep every suspicious street corner while constantly searching for the traces of the cover team members. In their view, the Dongfeng Corps trapped in the formation was a mouse, and there were hundreds of cats watching them eagerly. No matter how difficult the process is, the mouse will always be eaten by the cat. Time is of the essence. At this moment, the airport defenders on the southwest side had already begun to dispatch. Taking advantage of the opportunity when the enemy's attention was diverted, Chen Chen and Lin, he successfully went underwater and entered the river. The speed of the undercurrent was far beyond Chen Chen's imagination. With no support, he was nearly washed away by the current. Fortunately, Lin He on the side had already stabilized his body. He stepped his legs into the mud on the riverbank and pulled Chen Chen, whose body was already tilted a little. Sink sideways and don't raise your arms, Lin He warned in a low voice, and then the two of them quickly walked forward to the deep water and dived into the water in one go. At this time, they were more than 10 meters away from the riverbank. Without the cover of aquatic plants and vegetation, every move on the water would be exposed to the Kachin army's vision. The turbid river water had made Chen Chen completely lose his direction. All he could do was pull the rope connecting the two of them and swim forward in the direction of Lin He. Only then did he realize how crude his idea was. Breathing with the help of a water tube is indeed feasible, but in the water, a water tube that is more than 1 meter long is subjected to great impact. It is not easy just to stand it up, let alone to accurately extend it out of the water and find opportunities to breathe in a series of actions such as treading water, paddling, floating, etc. Chen Chen took 6 breaths, 3 of which were taken after he drank a mouthful of river water mixed with mud and sand. His physical strength was almost pushed to the limit in just 100 meters. The dizziness and pain caused by lack of oxygen and water in the lungs made his limbs weak. His chest seemed to be pressed by a huge rock, and his limbs were numb when he took a breath for the 7th time. But fortunately, his feet had already stepped on the mud underground. Then Lin He pulled the rope, indicating that he could get out of the water. Chen Chen stood up slowly, and after his nose emerged from the water, he took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Reached the other side. At this time, they were already nearly 200 meters downstream from the launching point and had arrived behind the airport defenders who were besieging Magong. His face had turned completely pale, and Lin He beside him was nowhere to be found. Chen Chen glanced at his watch with a slight tremor, then said, "For minutes, not bad. We have 45 minutes left, keep going. Cover team, we have arrived. We can stop the confrontation and continue to hide." A moment later, Yang Shu's reply came over the radio. "Understood. Stop the confrontation and continue hiding." Chen Chen heaved a sigh of relief and sorted out all the equipment in front of him. Then he gave Lin He a look. Without any hesitation, the two climbed up the riverbank one after the other and ran towards the jungle.